Chapter 566. When the carriage entered the city of Glow, the surroundings suddenly became noisy. Yorko could not help but lift the curtain and look out. He saw all kinds of shops on both sides of the road. Some of them had set up awnings in front of their doors and placed tables and chairs for people to rest, while others directly spread their goods on the ground and stood on the side of the street, shouting loudly. The whole long street was no different from a market. For a moment, he felt as if he had come to Eagle City, the town that had evolved from a market. Oh no, Eagle City had been burned down by the Queen of Clearwater, and the tall and majestic buildings in the distance also showed that the scale of the city was quite extraordinary. What do you think of King's City of the Kingdom of Dawn? A lazy woman's voice came from behind him. It's indeed a city of merchants. Even the main road of the city can be openly hawked by peddlers. If it were in Grey Castle, it would have been swept clean by the patrols, Yorko exclaimed. I'm afraid that only the fjords can compare with you. The fjords? The woman said disdainfully, they're just a group of carpetbaggers. They just transport goods from all over the world to scarce places and sell them back and forth to earn the difference in price. There are very few goods to sell on the island. After thinking about it, only salted fish can be sold for some money. Of course, you're the best merchant. Yorko smiled and retracted his neck. You're not bad either. She smiled and put her hand on his shoulder. My Mr. Ambassador. She was a noble merchant Yorko had met in a border city of the Kingdom of Dawn. Unlike Grey Castle, a merchant's wealth could even be used as a title in the Kingdom of Dawn. Most nobles were merchants, and the status of a noble merchant was comparable to that of the upper nobles. At the same time, the Kingdom of Dawn was also a big producer. Not only was it rich in agricultural products, but its textile raw materials and finished products were also exported to the three countries. Before setting off, Yorko had crammed a lot of knowledge on the history and customs of the neighboring countries. Playing dumb could win a woman's satisfaction, but no one liked an idiot who knew nothing. The merchant's name was Denise Peyton. Although she was 35 or 36 years old, her skin was still very well maintained, smooth and elastic. Her light brown hair was tied up on top of her head, and one strand of it was deliberately dyed purple. It looked quite weird at first, but after getting used to it, he unexpectedly found it not bad. As a noble woman who was traveling far away and had no one to look after her, she was naturally interested in having fun. It only took Yorko 2 days to have a pleasant conversation with her, and then he won her favor with a bottle of perfume. After the pleasure, the two of them were completely stuck together. Not only did they travel side by side, but Denise also pulled him into her luxurious carriage. By the way, what's the most popular business in the city of Glow? What you want to join in too? Entrusted by my old friend. No, by the respected King Wimbledon, I may have to stay here for a long time, 10 or 20 years, Yorko said in a relaxed manner. Since this is a city of merchants, I can't be exempt from the customs. Just like what you said, I have to follow the customs. Good nobles are good merchants, Denise added. That's right, good nobles are good merchants. Yorko clapped his hands and laughed. In Grey Castle, an ambassador is equivalent to an earl. How can I live up to this title if I can't do business? You're right, she whispered in Yorko's ear. There are 2 kinds of things that sell well in the King's City. The first kind is practical goods, which can be used most of the time, but of course, can't be too common. For example, crystal glasses, silver mirrors, perfumes, high-quality fabrics and fabrics. The other kind is novelty goods, which have no standard price. It all depends on whether the buyer likes them or not. Every weekend, a similar trade show will be held in the city, and the entry requirements are different according to the level of the show. It sounds interesting. Yorko's eyes lit up. It's really interesting. If I didn't see it, I wouldn't have known there were such things in the world. If you're interested, I can take you to visit the top exhibitions. But recently, there's a business that surpasses the two. Denise paused for a moment to whet his appetite, and then said, the slave trade. Slave? He was stunned. It's not a rare thing. That's why I said recently, the female merchant explained. A business without capital is always the most popular. You should know the news that the kingdom of Wolfheart has been conquered by the church, right? Thousands of refugees are pouring in from there. As long as you give them some food, you can get a batch of them. You won't lose anything by selling them anywhere. Now many merchants in the city of Glow have gone to the border, rushing to make a fortune before the refugee tide ends. After all, this business will be over when the war subsides. But you're going to the border of Grey Castle. I don't like the feeling of buying and selling people. Denise shrugged. Especially women. Then don't think about it. Yorko put his arms around her and said, a business without capital doesn't mean it's risk-free. When those refugees become mobs, the slave merchants will have a headache. It seems that you know something about business, she said with her hand covering her mouth. At this moment, the coachman's voice came from the front of the carriage. Madam, we've arrived at the palace area. Let's say goodbye here. Yorko kissed her fiercely. The time on the road is so sweet and short. I'll remember it. Don't you want to come to my mansion? Denise asked with a seductive look. I have official business to attend to, so I won't waste your time. Of course, the answer was no. She was a married man. Now that he was in her territory, how could he go to her mansion as a guest? If the patriarch found out, it would be strange if he didn't get beaten half to death. Yorko hurriedly jumped off the carriage and waved to her. I think we'll have a chance to meet again. I think so too. She raised her eyebrows. Maybe the next time we meet will be faster than you can imagine. What? He closed the curtain and left with a smile. The title of Devil Hand is indeed well-deserved. Hill Fox walked to Yorko's side and sighed when the envoy delegation behind the caravan approached Yorko after he got off the carriage. What did you talk to her about these days? Hill Fox was a personal guard arranged by His Majesty. It was said that Hill Fox had made many contributions to His Majesty, although he did not look like he could fight at all. What else can I talk about with a merchant? Of course, it's business. In fact, even business was just a primer for him to start a conversation. Catering to her interest was the best way to quickly shorten the distance between them. Whether it was through words or gifts, he could always scratch the most itchy spot of a woman. What are you going to do next? Chapter 567. The welcome banquet was arranged after dusk. The eldest son of the King of Dawn, Deacon Moya, warmly received them in the palace hall. It was the first time Yorko had attended such a high-standard banquet. The entire hall was illuminated by candles and oil lamps, and there were open skylights where the chandeliers hung on the dome of the hall. Countless flames were like stars in the sky, but it did not make people feel stuffy at all. A long table made of white cloth was set up in the shape of a staircase, and various kinds of glassware were placed on it. The bright red wine reflected a ruby luster under the candlelight, and the hall was filled with silver mirrors and gold wares, which made the entire hall look magnificent. The level of luxury here was no less than that of the Grey Castle Palace. Of course, what attracted Yorko's attention the most were the noble women walking among the men. Some of them were young and childish, while others were mature and plump. Whether their hair was coiled up or scattered on their shoulders, a strand of colorful satin that was different from the original color could be seen, as if it was a decoration buried in the hair tip. Recalling Denise's appearance, it seemed that this was also the popular style of the nobles in the Kingdom of Dawn. In addition, most of them wore close-fitting satin, which shone brightly when they walked, showing off their curves perfectly. Unlike the robes popular in Grey Castle, most of these clothes stopped at the knees and exposed their shoulders, as if they were deliberately seducing him. Yorko cheered in his heart, thinking that he had made the right choice. If the women in Grey Castle were particular about being reserved, then here they were unabashedly passionate. Of course, most of their passion was for the handsome young men and the knight, not the nobles who were not outstanding enough like him. However, this was not a problem for Yorko, who had never relied on his appearance to attract people. Welcome to the Kingdom of Dawn. A young man with a slightly pale face walked up to him, surrounded by a crowd of people. I've read Roland Wimbledon's letter of introduction and documents. Does this mean that he now has the whole Grey Castle? There was no doubt that this man was the host of the banquet, His Highness Appin Moya. Yorko immediately put his hand on his chest and saluted. Since he represented the royal family of Grey Castle, he did not need to kneel on one knee. While bowing his head, he was also secretly surprised. If the welcoming banquet was hosted by his eldest son, it could be said that the king was busy with government affairs and could not spare time. But it was a little unreasonable that His Majesty's letter was directly handed over to his eldest son. To put it more seriously, it could even be seen as a diplomatic breach. He answered the other party's question first, then braced himself and asked, "I wonder if your father—" "He's ill, very ill," sighed Appin. "That's why he can't entertain you himself." "Very, very sorry to hear that." "It doesn't matter. Everyone in the city of Glow already knows about it. 1.5 months ago, he suddenly fainted at a banquet and hasn't recovered since. He can only stay awake for 4 to 6 hours a day and spends the rest of the time sleeping." 1.5 months ago. That was almost the day when he set off from the king's city of Grey Castle. Yorko comforted him. "Your Majesty, he'll get better gradually. Please don't worry too much." "Thank you." The prince forced a smile. "Enjoy the banquet. I'll ask the ceremonial officer to prepare a place for you to stay later." "Thank you." Just as the other party was about to leave, Yorko suddenly remembered his business and said hurriedly, "By the way, Your Highness, I wonder if you know about the alliance between the Kingdom of Dawn and Grey Castle." "I know about it, but my father can't deal with government affairs for the time being. Let's talk about it when he gets better." After the group of people left, Yorko felt a little relieved. It seemed that he was quite talented as an ambassador. Nothing went wrong during his first negotiation with the senior members of the royal family. It was a pity that he encountered a small accident on his primary task. But it was not a big deal. Anyway, he would live in the city for a long time. Moya 4 could not be sick for several years in a row. It was better to take advantage of this period to pay more attention to the beautiful woman in the hall. "We meet again, Mr. Ambassador." While he was thinking, he suddenly heard a familiar voice behind him. Yorko was startled. He turned around abruptly and found that it was Denise Peyton, the merchant who had been with him all the way. "Why you here? I told you we'll meet again soon." She raised a glass of red wine and smiled. "Let's drink to our reunion." Yorko hurriedly looked around, fearing that some nobleman was staring at him. "Are you looking for my husband?" Denise raised her eyebrows. "Don't worry, he's not qualified to be here." "You mean?" "I'm the master of the Peyton family, not him," Denise said bluntly. "The maids at home are enough for him to enjoy. If he wants to go out and try something new, he can't do it without my permission." "I see." Yorko was relieved. It seemed that Denise was the true heir of the Peyton family. If a woman wanted to continue the family's practice, she would usually take in some fallen noblemen as her partners. Due to the great difference in status, it was natural that the man had to change his name. "You should have told me earlier." He pretended to be relieved. "I don't want to ruin a pure love." "Really?" Denise pouted. "When you reached out to me, it was no longer pure." She paused. "Do you have any other plans after the dinner?" "Well, I don't think so." Yorko put his arm around her slender waist. "If you invite me, then I know a good place." "I'll leave it to you, my dear." After the banquet, Otto pulled the eldest prince aside in confusion. "I don't understand, Your Highness. Even if His Majesty Moya is ill, you can agree to the covenant first. Why did you put it aside? It's your father's idea to form an alliance with Grey Castle. The church is so aggressive. We shouldn't fight alone. I heard that my father asked you to find Timothy Wimbledon instead of Roland Wimbledon. Our alliance should be with the King of Grey Castle. The message from the ambassador also proves this. His Majesty is the new king of the neighboring country." Appin Moya nodded. "Thank you for the secret visit to Grey Castle. But I have my own plans for the alliance. You don't have to worry about it anymore." "Your Highness." "You don't understand," Appin interrupted. "I'm thinking about the Kingdom of Dawn. It's for the safety of the kingdom that we need someone to contain the church's attack." I said, "You don't have to worry about it anymore." Appin's voice rose involuntarily. "Sorry, I was rude." Seeing the eldest prince like this, he had to give up. As soon as he turned around, His Highness suddenly stopped him. "We're friends, right?" Otto was silent for a moment. "Yes, Andrea, Belinda, Oro and I are all your friends. Chapter 568. Otto Luashi returned home and locked himself in his study. He did not understand why things had turned out this way. Since the king fell ill, Appin seemed to have suffered a great blow. Recently, he had recovered a little, but his behavior and speech were not the same as before. To be precise, he had become a stranger. As a childhood friend, Otto thought he knew the prince very well. Appin was not the kind of person who would do anything for power. Sometimes he even felt that he was a little childish and not suitable to be a king who could command the overall situation. Because of this, he planned to help his friend manage the state affairs with Belinda and Oro after Appin was crowned queen. The three families had always followed the king closely, since the establishment of the Kingdom of Dawn. So he still answered yes without hesitation. But Otto found that Appin did not care about his answer. He asked that out of a habit of uneasiness. And he had not considered this point. The three families were indeed willing to support the Moya royal family, but what if His Highness did not need their support? Now that he realized this, he felt that Appin was getting further and further away from him. Otto heaved a sigh of relief. Maybe he should take the initiative to do something. But what should he do? Neither pharmacists nor alchemists could do anything about the king's illness. He knew nothing about curing diseases, so he could not fundamentally solve Appin's problem. Should he persuade the prince to pull himself together? He had done this many times, but it turned out to be useless. Probably he alone could not pull His Highness back to his side. The three families must unite. Only by working together could they find out the reason why Appin did this. Thinking of this, he suddenly stood up and walked out. "Young master, it's very late now. Where are you going?" The housekeeper caught up with him and asked as he passed the hall. "The Tokat family. I'm not coming back tonight." He arrived at the Tokat family's territory with ease. As the two of them were very familiar with each other, no one in the large count's mansion stopped him. Otto walked straight into the training hall and, as expected, found Oro Tokat training with a servant. "Hey, why are you here?" Oro took off his sweaty headscarf and threw the wooden sword to the servant. "You want to have fun but don't dare to enter, so you decided to drag me down with you? I have something to tell you." He pulled Oro to the resting room next door and explained his thoughts and plans. "What do you think? Find out why Appin became strange?" The latter curled his lips. "Sorry, I'm not interested." "Hey you, he's the prince and the heir of the Kingdom of Dawn. He won't be our friend forever. Do you understand?" Oro shook his head. "Besides, Appin is already 20 years old. He's no longer a 7 or 8-year-old kid. Do we have to coax him just because he's throwing a tantrum? If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. I don't want to blindly ask around. Aren't you going to assist Appin Moya? If His Highness needs us, then we'll be assisting him. If we don't, then we'll just be asking for trouble." Could it be that he had also noticed this? Otto's heart skipped a beat. "But the three of us have always been Moyas, 3 families?" Oro smiled disapprovingly. "Since Andrea died, there's only you and me." He turned around and waved his hand as he walked out. "Since you're here, I'll take you to Crimson Dream for a stroll. Otherwise, I'll be tired of worrying about this and that. I'll be fine after I vent my energy. Andrea didn't die." Oro's footsteps stopped instantly. "Sorry," Otto whispered in his heart. "I promised to keep this a secret, but I didn't keep my promise." "Andrea Quinn didn't die," he repeated. "I saw her in border town of Grey Castle." Oro instantly turned around and rushed in front of him. He was so strong that he almost pressed Otto against the wall. What did you say? Is this true?" "I saw her with my own eyes. She's with His Highness Roland Wimbledon. Together." Oro's eyes widened. "You mean the kind of together between a man and a woman?" "I don't know." Otto bit his lip. "But she became a witch. In the entire Grey Castle, only His Highness Roland is willing to take in a witch." "Wait, a witch?" He was surprised. What happened at that time? Otto Luashi slowly told Oro about Andrea's experience. Looking at Oro's complicated expression, he felt a faint satisfaction of revenge. "Who told you to immediately believe the Quinn family's story of falling off the cliff?" It's too late now that you know she's not dead. She won't be with me, nor will she be with you. So that's why her father created the accident. Oro sat on the ground after listening, his face full of frustration. Damn it, why didn't I think of digging up the grave to take a closer look? This guy is too much. Ahem, that's why we need to get His Highness Appin back. Oro rolled his eyes. What's the relationship between the two? Of course it's related. Think about it. He shelved the treaty between the two countries and refused to give a reason. In the end, it will only make His Majesty's plan to fight together fail. Once the church attacks, we can only defend ourselves. If they attack the Kingdom of Dawn first, you'll lead the night group to fight, right? Otto asked. Of course, it's my duty. Then you'll be defeated and killed. You won't be able to see Andrea anymore, right? Well, that sounds reasonable. Wait, why do you think I'll definitely lose? Oro protested. Even the Wolf Fang Kingdom, which has a strong and ferocious culture, couldn't turn the tide. How strong can you be? He ignored his good friend's protest and continued. If the church attacks Grey Castle first, Roland will have to fight the invaders, right? If he dies, Andrea will probably die with him. If she's caught by the church, her fate will be even worse. But if the two countries can work together to prevent the church from attacking, you won't have to die on the battlefield, and you'll have a chance to meet again in the future. Do you think the treaty is important? It is. If we don't pull His Highness back, there won't be a treaty. Do you think the two things are related now? Yes. So are you going to do it or not? Oro said resolutely, I'm going to do it. They held each other's hands tightly. Yorko dragged his tired but comfortable body back to his room. As soon as he opened the bedroom door, he heard a voice saying, You're finally back. He was shocked. He had just arrived. Who would sneak into his room and wait for him? Could it be Denise's husband? Before he could decide whether to escape or beg for mercy, the other party had already lit the candle. In the firelight, he found that it was Hill Fox who spoke. You almost scared me to death, you know? Yorko heaved a long sigh. Can't you wait until tomorrow to talk? No one will notice that I've been here at night. Hill spread out his hands and said, I'm used to being cautious. Please understand. It's okay. Although Hill was Yorko's personal guard, he was appointed by His Majesty and could not be treated as an ordinary servant. Since you're here, just say it. Now that a large number of refugees from the Kingdom of Wolfheart are pouring into the Kingdom of Dawn, it's a good opportunity to recruit people. You can treat it as a business, mainly buying craftsmen, literate people, and people with special skills. All the money you need will be paid by His Majesty, and for each person you hire, you will get a reward of 5 silver royals. Please, I don't know how to do business. Chatting with Denise is just to seduce her. You're not really going to make me a human trafficker, are you? Yorko said with his hand on his forehead. Besides, the slave trade mainly takes place on the border between the two kingdoms. As an ambassador, it's not convenient for me to go there. This is His Majesty's idea, Hill said slowly. You don't need to leave the City of Glow. Merchants will always sell the slaves here. It doesn't matter if the price is higher, and it saves you the trouble of screening. As for whether you know how to do business, you can ask Denise Payton for help. She's a famous noble merchant here, and it's not difficult for her to transport the refugees to Grey Castle. Once the transportation line is established, it'll also benefit us a lot. For example, when we encounter danger, we can disguise ourselves as merchants and evacuate at any time. It's both covert and safe. Yorko opened his mouth wide and asked, You've been to the King's City of the Kingdom of Dawn? Hill shook his head. Then how do you know so much about it? I heard it on the street when you went out to expand your relationship. I thought you were a knight who could fight, but I didn't expect you to be a shrewd merchant, Yorko said with admiration. I'm neither a warrior nor a merchant, but I can protect your safety at critical times. This is also the mission His Majesty entrusted to me. Then you're... Chapter 569. In the suburb of the western city wall of Neverwinter. The loud roar attracted many people to climb the city wall to watch. The First Army had blocked the entrance to the misty forest to prevent people from breaking into the test site. Although the site was far away from the city wall, it was still possible to see what was going on with an observation mirror. It seems that I have to find a secluded place as a dedicated test site, Roland thought. Your Majesty, the second round of firing is ready, the soldier reported. Everyone, get into the bunker. He waved his hand and said, start the countdown after making sure no one is around. Now that the 152mm howitzer was being tested and the sigil of magic stones was being studied, Roland did not neglect the improvement of firearms and explosives. Now that Timothy had been defeated and the northern region had declared their allegiance, Grey Castle was in a good situation, so he had time to make a new round of improvement on the artillery. However, it had to be said that the technical difficulty of the howitzer with a trigger fuse was several levels higher than that of a solid shell. Anna would hand-make 4 artillery shells for testing every day, but none of the artillery shells successfully exploded after 3 consecutive days. Even on the second day of the test, a shell directly exploded as soon as it was fired, causing the new artillery tube used for testing to become crooked. Fortunately, Roland was well prepared and dug several trenches around the test site to prevent accidents, so there were no casualties. As for the soldiers closest to the artillery, their eardrums were broken by Nana in time. Will this thing really explode when it touches the enemy, as you said? Agatha stood on tiptoe in the trench and could not help but look around. I've asked Anna. It's just made of a few pieces of metal. It's not a living thing. How can it distinguish whether the enemy is an enemy or not? She was the most active witch in the Union in weapon testing. After learning about this, she even temporarily put aside the production of the chemical factory and specially came to see the research progress of the new artillery shells. It won't explode when it touches the enemy, but when it falls into the enemy's position, Roland corrected her. This is also a requirement that the howitzer must meet. Without a safety to ensure this, the artillery shell may accidentally fire at any time, which is too dangerous. The trigger safety was the core technology of the new artillery shell and also the focus of the test. In order to avoid collision and accidental falling off, he had painstakingly set up a total of 3 safety measures. First, the fuse was stored and transported separately from the cannonball. Only when it was used would it be installed on the spot. The shape of the fuse was like a cone with a handle about the size of a fist. Its tail had a screw thread, and when installed, it could be screwed into the notch at the top of the cannonball. It was fast and convenient. Because the shells were loaded with double-base chemical gunpowder, it was difficult to detonate without a detonator, fundamentally ensuring the safety of the logistics work. Next was the inertia safety in the fuse. It was similar to a door lock. Under normal circumstances, it would be held by a stiff spring and unable to move. When the artillery shell was fired, the huge inertia would cause the lock core to recoil, thus engraving the resistance of the spring, opening the latch teeth and removing the second safety. The principle was simple, but it was not easy to put it into practice. The first 2 days were spent on it. If the spring was too hard, the lock core would not be able to recoil enough. If the spring was too soft, it would not be safe enough. Anna could only slowly adjust it according to the test firing situation. After 6 rounds of tests, she finally got a more reliable spring compression data. The last safety was the centrifugal detonator. It was also the most technical thing in the fuse. Simply put, the detonator was embedded in a semicircular iron plate the size of a coin, usually standing in the center of the fuse in a slanted position, fixed by a spring. At this moment, the firing pin, the detonator, and the stimulant were not in a straight line. Even if the artillery shell fell from a high place, the firing pin would not touch the detonator, avoiding the risk of misfire. Only after the second safety latch teeth were out of the lock position could the iron plate be in a state of movement. Due to the effect of the rifling of the barrel, the grenade would spin at a very high speed after leaving the chamber. Under the action of centrifugal force, the slanted detonator would gradually return to normal, similar to a spinning top, and the center of gravity would move closer to the central axis. This process was completed about 200 to 300 meters after leaving the chamber. In this way, even if the muzzle was blocked or there was a tree overhead, the warhead would not explode prematurely. When the detonator was completely returned to normal, it would form a straight line with the firing pin and the stimulant. At this time, once the fuse touched the ground, the firing pin would plunge into the detonator and then use the stimulant to drive the high-temperature gunpowder into the warhead, tearing the surrounding enemies into pieces. The advantage of the centrifugal safety was that if the artillery shell misfired, the detonator that had lost its centrifugal force would be pushed back to its original position by the spring and become slanted again. This way, the recovery work would be much safer. In addition, if the entire grenade was seized by the enemy or accidentally picked up by the enemy, it could only be used as a solid artillery shell because it could not obtain enough centrifugal force when fired by conventional means. As for dismantling and copying it, it was even more impossible. Ready to fire. Countdown of 5. The observer gave the command. The extension of the fuse rope slowly tightened, and the gunner hiding in the trench retracted the rope bit by bit. Fire! As the soldier pulled with force, the ground instantly trembled. The fierce wind from the muzzle accompanied by the roar swept over everyone's head. Roland felt a lot of small soil particles roll into his collar. Even if he tightly covered his ears, he could still feel the tremors from the soles of his feet. Observed the landing point. No explosion. I repeat, no explosion. Lightning's voice quickly came from the sigil of listening in Nightingale's hand. Got it? We'll be there right away. She took out another magic stone and replied. Failed again? Agatha could not help but feel a little depressed. It's normal to fail when you're exploring, Anna comforted her. Once we find the right direction, we can ensure that we won't fail in mass production. Well said. Roland patted her head approvingly. And now with Summer and Sylvie's help, the research and development progress is already amazing. In the future, it would not be a problem to fire thousands of rounds of grenade prototyping tests. It would be impossible to find the problem within 2 or 3 rounds. When they arrived at the location where the warhead landed, Anna first cut off the fuse with Blackfire to ensure that the warhead was safe. Then, the soldier collected the waste grenade. Whether it was the gunpowder or the metal body, they could be reused, so naturally, they should not be wasted. Summer, it's your turn. Roland gestured to her. Yes, Your Majesty. She nodded and displayed her playback ability. In an instant, the phantom image of a falling shell appeared in front of everyone. Summer's level of magic power was still low. After several months of training, she could only support 4 replays. However, through precise control of her magic power, she could now freeze the scene at a certain moment. This kind of playback was a perfect reproduction of the scene. In other words, with her X-ray vision, Sylvie could see the inside of the illusion, except that it could not be touched. It was no different from the real scene. Chapter 570. Sylvie scrutinized the shell for a while and compared it with Roland's design sketch for a long time. She then pointed at the detonator and said, "It seems that this copper pipe is not aligned with the nail at the top." "What about the springs?" Anna asked. "Are they still stuck on both sides of the iron plate?" "One is crooked. Left or right?" Anna asked for details and then wrote down each question in her notebook. After collecting the reasons for the failure, it was time for the next round of shooting. 4 shots were enough for Summer to use all her playback ability. In this way, the efficiency of the improvement was naturally higher than ever. Unfortunately, the next 2 rounds of shooting also failed. Roland had to announce that they would continue the test the next day. For Summer and Sylvie, their work for the day was over. After that, they could go back to the castle to enjoy the delicious afternoon tea, or go to the convenience market to see if there were any novel products. However, for Anna and Agatha, the grenade test was just a small part of their busy work. In particular, Anna had to improve the fuse according to the reasons for the failure, and then she had to complete the development and assembly of the steam turbine. Roland planned to follow her to the backyard of the North Slope to see the progress of the steam turbine model, but his guard, Sean, brought him news from City Hall. "Your Majesty, the Deputy Minister of Construction, Lozia, hopes that you can go to the furnace area. He said that the first retort has been set up." As a necessary facility for the coking plant, the planned 10 retort towers were set up next to the furnace group at the foot of the North Slope mining area. Due to the wantonly cutting of bricks and iron, the furnace group had changed from a small open space of less than 1,000 square meters to a vast empty area extending along the mountain. If Roland had not strictly prohibited the workers from using the woods near the town, there would not have been a single tree left in the north of the border area. Although there was coal now, the convenient and easy-to-obtain charcoal was still the main source of iron smelting. As they moved further and further away from the furnaces, the workers set their sights on the North Slope mountain. Every day, hundreds of logs would be chopped off and thrown down from the top of the mountain. From a distance, the verdant mountain peak already had a small, bald spot. Naturally, Roland wouldn't ask them to protect the environment. As long as the dust didn't affect the town, he didn't care even if they chopped down the entire North Slope mountain. After all, compared to the impassable mountain range, this protruding small mountain range was just an insignificant corner. With Leaf maintaining the basic vegetation, there was basically no need to worry about soil erosion. The flat land at the foot of the mountain naturally became the most suitable place for the coking plant to stay. Roland led Nightingale and his guards through the noisy furnace area and came to the first distillation tower. Lozia immediately came forward and bowed to him. "Your Majesty, I built this double-story furnace with refractory bricks according to your request. According to the blueprint, the upper story should be sealed with an iron door, and the middle story should have an iron plate that can be moved freely. However, I don't know who to find to make these two things. The copper pipes and chimney of the small furnace are the same. Except for these metal components, the rest of the parts have been completed." Roland got into the furnace and examined it. As a former member of the Mason Guild and an old friend of Car Van Bate, Lozia was indeed very knowledgeable in masonry. The walls of the distillation tower, which was nearly 2 stories high, were uniform. The gap between each brick was basically the same, and the brick joints were interlaced layer by layer. There was not even a single straight seam. Not only was the arrangement of the bricks excellent, but the construction was also very serious. Even if the same blueprint was used, the finished product built by different people could be very different. "Well done," Roland praised after examining it. "I will arrange for someone to cast the iron door and iron plate. After that, you just need to cover the fire-facing surface with refractory bricks." "Your Majesty," Lozia hesitated and said, "can you tell me how this furnace works?" "Do you want to be a coking worker?" Roland joked. "Of course not." Roland quickly shook his head. "I have never built such a strange furnace before. Therefore, I can only make guesses about the parts that are not clearly described in the blueprint. If I know its specific usage and function, not only will I be able to build the second furnace faster, but I will also be able to improve some of the parts that I am not sure about." "I see," Roland said with a smile. "This type of furnace is mainly used for the distillation of coal. You should have seen how charcoal is burned, right? This one is similar, but on a larger scale. The lower story is burned, and the upper story is baked. The filler is coal." "Using coal to bake coal?" Lozia said in surprise. "That's right. After the distillation of coal, it can be turned into coke, which burns at a higher temperature. It is a good fuel for making steel. In addition, the distillation process will produce several byproducts. The pipes on the tower wall are used to collect them, not to exhaust the chimney. Then, why is there a small furnace next to the furnace? During the distillation, there must be no air in the upper story, otherwise the coal will burn directly." Roland pointed to the hole between the 2 furnaces. "The limestone calcined in the small furnace will produce a lot of carbon dioxide. You can think of it as a kind of gas that can't be burned." "Your Majesty, I know this," Lozia said. "This part is taught in the evening classes." "That's easy." Roland was pleased. It seemed that the content of universal education was being broadened little by little with Scroll's efforts. The carbon dioxide will enter the upper story of the furnace through the pipe, and all the air will be squeezed out, so that the coal can achieve the distillation effect. As for the limestone, it is the grayish-white stone used to bake cement. It is everywhere on the North Slope mountain. After inspecting the first tower of the distillation, Roland retraced his steps back and stopped by the furnace area for a while. Just by looking at the busy scene in front of him, Roland could not help but feel a little excited. All kinds of brick furnaces stood side by side. At first glance, it looked like a neat red forest. Dozens of smoke columns rose from the forest. Gray, white, and black intertwined with each other. Together with the workers in plain clothes and the outdated equipment, it formed a very contemporary picture. More than 10 steam engines were rumbling, pulling the conveyor belts to send the raw materials and charcoal into the blast furnace. The track system had also been laid from the mine cave to here. Small mining carts were running between the two places. The iron or transfer speed was much faster than before. Chapter 571. As the incomplete spring came to an end and summer arrived, the population of Neverwinter reached its first explosive peak. The operation of sending messengers to the east and the south to recruit refugees began to pay off. With the experience of the previous year, the recruitment efficiency of various emissary teams was greatly improved. Every day, hundreds of people gathered in Redwater City and Willow Town, waiting for the ships from the western region to take them to the rumored prosperous and stable Neverwinter. In order to settle these people properly, City Hall also commissioned merchants to rent temporary barracks at the gathering place and provided free porridge and water to avoid accidents before the refugees arrived at the western region. The border area dock became the busiest area in the city. 90% of the police force was used to maintain order and register the population. There was always a long queue in front of the quarantine checkpoint. The officials in charge of household registration divided the swarms of refugees into several categories, and then moved them into the prefab houses by the river, the caves in the west of the city, and the formal houses according to their categories. Because of this, the busy City Hall was in a state of chaos every day. 3 sailboats from Redwater City have just arrived at the dock. There are 126 people in total. They have a blue flag on the mast. The person in charge is Barb. Again? How many batches are there today? Is it the 4th or the 5th? Anyway, stop complaining. Go and take the ships. By the way, who replaced Barb to go to Redwater City? It's me. Wait, it's almost ready. Remember to bring the soap. It's not for sale there. Listening to the noisy conversation outside the office, Barav frowned. It was not that he felt there were too many things to do. Usually, the busier the city hall was, the happier he would be. But recently, the situation had become complicated. The reason was because of Edith Kant. Director, the Ministry of Justice is urging us again. An assistant walked into the office. Sir Carter wants to recruit another 100 people as reserve police officers. He said if we don't increase the number of people, the security of the city will be out of control. If His Majesty asks about this, we can't escape the responsibility. Well, it's just because I'm the chief knight that I can talk to His Majesty. I have no time to take care of such a trivial matter. While drafting a document, Barav said without looking up, "Put it on the table. I'll deal with it later." As soon as the assistant closed the door, he heard Edith's voice. "This is related to the recruitment order, right? Since you're too busy, I'll help you take a look." Sure enough, they came. Barav cursed in his heart. He didn't even use honorifics. Of course, as the daughter of the Duke of the Northern Region, her status was indeed much higher than his. Until she became the real hand of the king, she could directly call him by his name without using honorifics. However, he was at least half a mentor to her, right? After all, His Majesty had arranged for Edith to work in the director's office as an assistant to learn the structure of City Hall departments and the process of government affairs. However, it seemed that she did not think so now. "Well, that's fine too," he said reluctantly. No matter how helpless he was, Miss Kant's words and deeds were not wrong. If he kept on refusing, it would be unreasonable if it was heard by His Majesty. At this critical moment, he could not leave a bad impression on His Majesty. He would never forget that Roland Wimbledon was a devil who could see through people's hearts. "Thanks." Soon, the rustling sound of writing came from the opposite table. Half a quarter of an hour later, Edith put the recruitment order back on his table. According to the draft I've read recently, this kind of recruitment generally requires that the person is reliable and has a clean background. There shouldn't be many people like this left in the border area. Instead of posting the notice on the square and asking those who are interested to come to the city hall to apply, it's better to directly select 100 local people from the archives who haven't got a formal job yet. The Ministry of Justice is part of the city hall, and the salary and benefits are good. I think no one will refuse. In this way, it will save about a week compared to the normal recruitment process, and Chief Knight will also complain less. If you think it's okay, I'll send it to the archives according to this reply. Her voice was clear and organized. It was hard to believe that she had only joined the city hall for about 2 weeks. He remembered that in the beginning, she just sat aside and quietly read the documents she reviewed and rarely spoke. But now, she was very familiar with all the matters of the city hall. I'll do as you say. Barav could not think of a better way to deal with Edith's suggestion. It was even possible that he would ignore these unimportant things in his busy schedule and directly deal with them in the conventional way. Was this the heir who grew up in the Duke's mansion and was educated by the upper nobles? Barav felt a deep sense of threat. Yes, honorifics and honorifics were trivial matters. What he really cared about was the power in his hands. The news of the northern region's full submission was now known. If Edith was sent by His Majesty as an assistant to build a second-level city hall in the northern region, it would not affect him much. But what if she stayed? His Majesty was currently unmarried, and the other party was a real duke's daughter. Thinking of this, Barav felt a headache. No, he had to let her know that the management of the city hall was not so easy to grasp. His Majesty needed a minister who could coordinate the overall situation for him. When Edith returned to the office, he cleared his throat and handed the statistics in his hand to her. We're in trouble, Barav said in a low voice. The grain reserves in Neverwinter may not last until the wheat harvest. Well, is it caused by the influx of too many people? Edith glanced at the list. According to the consumption, the remaining grain should be able to last until the end of summer. The spring wheat can be harvested in mid-July. As long as we stop accepting refugees, this part of the grain will be enough. But the city hall must not stop accepting refugees. Because of the 100,000 population target set by His Majesty? Chapter 572. In a sense, this problem was unsolvable. The reason was that the total amount of food was limited. After the months of demons, the flow of food in the kingdom would enter a state of shortage. Not only would the price soar, but it was also not guaranteed that people would be able to buy it. The food shortage would not be alleviated until the wheat fields were harvested. Autumn was the season with the most frequent food transactions, and the price would rise rapidly during the months of demons. Of course, these transactions were generally for merchants and nobles. As for the penniless refugees and rats, they would have to go into the cold winter with empty stomachs, no matter how much wheat they had. According to Barav's many years of experience as the Assistant Minister of Finance, at this time, all the major cities were waiting for the wheat to ripen, so it was unlikely that they would sell a large amount of food. The shortage of a few thousand people might be able to be made up, but it would not be satisfied with tens of thousands of people. Since they could not increase their income, they could only reduce their expenditure. Edith's most likely suggestion was to reduce the food supply of the whole city, reduce the daily purchase quantity, and let the subjects eat oatmeal instead of bread, so that they could persist until the day of the harvest. In this case, he could refute the inappropriateness of this approach from His Majesty's promise to exchange food, the fact that the facts contradicted the propaganda, and the food shortage panic. Seeing Edith's raised eyebrows and flipping through the list, he knew that this problem was not easy to solve. It would not be long before she asked him what to do. Thinking of this, Barav could not help but stroke his beard. To be in charge of the overall situation, one must not only be skilled in government affairs, but also have a clear understanding of the characteristics of the city. For example, when he was in King's City, he could recite the price of the specialty products of the alchemist workshop and the amount of silver or shipped from Silver City every month without thinking. These were not things that could be remembered in a short time. And the specialty of Neverwinter was the witches. Barav knew that there was a green-haired woman named Leaf in the Witch Union, who could make the wheat fields grow at an incredible speed. When she did not care about the soil, she could even make the wheat ripen in a day, and the ears of wheat were far better than those of the golden ones. In other words, as long as she was asked to manage a wheat field and focus on rapid grain production, she could make up for the current shortage. Of course, he also knew that His Majesty was asking Leaf to control the misty forest in the west to build an early warning line against the demons. However, given that the demons would appear in several years, there was no hurry to stop for 2 or 3 months. This was something that Edith had no way of knowing. No matter how talented she was and how she had been involved in managing the affairs of the northern region since she was an adult, it was impossible for her to know this completely unfamiliar city like the back of her hand after only half a month since she arrived in Neverwinter, let alone understand the abilities of every witch. She didn't even understand why the Office of the Ministry of Education was connected to the archives, and why the Minister of Education often appeared there and had the power to read all the documents. After a while, Edith put down the list and slightly raised the corner of her mouth. This problem is actually not difficult to solve. Barav nodded at first, then froze. What? Before Deep Valley Town was developed, most of the land in the northern region was not suitable for growing wheat. So in spring, food would be particularly scarce, so the local lord set his sights on the eastern region and the Kingdom of Dawn. You mean? He suddenly realized something. Since we can't plant it or buy it, we can only rob it from others, Edith said casually. Isn't that the situation now? His Majesty's army is attacking Fallen Dragon Ridge. I heard that Countess Spear's brother has roped in many local nobles in order to resist her, right? Now that we have all the reasons and means, let's kill them one by one. How many golden dragons and food do you think they have hidden in their basements? The shortage of food is just that there's not much food left. In fact, most of the food produced by the kingdom has been divided by the nobles. They can use this part of food to control the freedmen and farmers in their territories, and also make a large amount of golden dragon during the bad harvest years. She spoke slowly, but her voice was chilly in Barav's ears. If we turn Fallen Dragon Ridge upside down, I think it's not a problem to provide food for tens of thousands of people. If it's not enough, there are several cities in the southeast waiting for His Majesty's demand. They're all nobles. The director closed his mouth halfway. That's right. After His Majesty occupied the southern region, they were no longer nobles. As long as they acted quickly enough, these spoils would be enough to fill the granary of Neverwinter again. And unlike King City, Fallen Dragon Ridge was a city completely loyal to His Majesty, and it was also the key to the southern region. At that time, City Hall would not only directly send people to assist Countess Spear to establish a new government, but also copy the laws, planning, and education of Neverwinter. Therefore, removing all the nobles would be beneficial to the stability of the city. What puzzled Barav was why Edith could accept the edict to remove the nobles so quickly. Even if he wholeheartedly supported His Majesty's order, he would not be able to adapt so quickly. And she was the successor of the Duke of the Northern Region. Back in the Foreign Affairs building, Edith pushed open the door and saw Cole leaning over the table, flipping through a thin book. What's that? I bought it from the convenience market. It looks like a picture, but it's accompanied by a story. It's quite interesting. Her brother looked up. You look happy. Am I? I rarely see you smile like this in the city of Evernight. Cole curled his lips. Are we really not going back? For the time being. When Father replies, His Majesty will probably allow you to return to the northern region. Edith sat opposite him and reached out to pick up the cover, only to see the words, Diary of a Witch, printed on it. What about you? I'm going to stay here. But Cole was puzzled. Is the City Hall that interesting? It's not the City Hall that's interesting. It's Roland Wimbledon's City Hall that's interesting. She corrected him with a chuckle. Do you know what I need to do in the city of Evernight? Just let Father know. Something like that. Many people will carry out the order. Now that I think about it, it has little to do with me. It's just because of my identity and father will listen to my advice. Of course, it's only in the fief of the Kant family. Edith said with interest, but here, my identity not only doesn't work, but even hinders me. There are almost no nobles in the city hall, and they don't care whether I'm the daughter of the Duke of the Northern Region or not. Everyone works according to their ability. Do you understand what I mean? Cole shook his head. Chapter 573. This be asterisk starred of a daughter. Duke Carr of the Northern Region grabbed the teacup on the table and was about to smash it on the ground, but he stopped halfway. The cup was made of high-quality crystal glass and was worth 2 or 3 golden dragonstones. He was reluctant to part with it. After thinking for a long time, he slowly retracted his hand and put the cup back in its original position. This feeling of loss and gain made him even more depressed. The letter from Edith was spread out on the table. He never thought that His Majesty would take back all the nobles' enfeoffment rights. What was even more unexpected was that his daughter, who always took advantage of him, would agree to His Majesty's conditions and even advise him to recognize the situation and not to resist stubbornly. Look at her words, he was treated as if he were a criminal. The Duke thought angrily, is my daughter siding with an outsider? Sir, what happened? The guard outside the door probably heard the noise and poked his head in to ask. Go away, don't bother me. Calvin could not bear to vent his anger on the cup, so he immediately vented his anger on the guard. The door was quickly closed, and he panted for a long time before he shifted his gaze back to the letter. If he followed His Majesty, he would no longer be the master of the Northern Region, at least not as strong as he was now. He had just gotten rid of the House and Lista families and could finally enjoy the feeling of being in control of the whole region. He didn't expect to be back to square one so soon. No, it should be even more backward than square one. What if I don't follow His Majesty? The letter is very clear. Then Cole and I are finished. He will be imprisoned in prison forever, just like the heir of the Duke Ryan. And my fate will only be worse. How do you think the former Prince Roland will treat a duke's daughter who can't resist? I can think of no less than 100 ways to humiliate a man. When he gets tired of me, I will be thrown into the dungeon or the military camp, and your Pearl of the Northern Region will be covered in dust. But don't worry about me, because you won't be any better, father. His army will soon reach the city, and I bet that your vassals and knight won't be able to hold out for half a day. When that time comes, you won't even be able to be a commoner, let alone a duke. How about it, would you make such a choice? Calvin could even imagine the sneer on Edith's face when she wrote this letter. Her tone was so familiar. Every time she talked about her failure, she would describe her fate in an extremely calm tone, as if she had been waiting for this day. As long as his daughter opened her mouth to lead in this direction, it would be very difficult for him to resist. It was clearly a threat, but Carr couldn't bring himself to rebuke her. After all, Edith Kant was his daughter and the only child he had with his first wife. Although her tone was rather exaggerated, it was indeed undeniable that there was such a possibility. He had also heard of the fourth prince's reputation. Thinking of this, the Duke gradually calmed down. But then again, were those black steel machines really as magical as she said? Out of the 3 sheets of paper, his daughter used a whole page to describe what she had seen and heard in Border Town, no, Neverwinter. It was twice as much as His Majesty. She claimed that they had unimaginable power and could easily achieve things that ordinary people couldn't. As long as the Northern Region surrendered to the new king, they could introduce these giant black iron beasts that could bring earth-shaking changes to the territory. It could be seen that Edith attached great importance to these things. Finally, she also suggested that he send a formal oath to His Majesty to show his submission to the Northern Region. At the same time, he should send some literate servants to learn the regulations and administrative methods of City Hall, so that they would not be ignorant of the new system. In addition, I hope that you can clearly instruct Cole to stay in Neverwinter, instead of letting him come back because it won't do him any good. If possible, when Lance came of age, he would also be sent over. In the case that the title can't be inherited, only those who adapt to His Majesty's new policy can continue the Kant family. Your daughter, Edith. Calvin let out a long sigh, put the letter away, and spread out a new piece of white paper. Since Edith had made her decision, he had to trust her and write a letter to His Majesty, pledging his loyalty to the new king's city. But as a duke, he had to make the last effort in his own way. If he could tie the interests of the two families tightly together, Carr would undoubtedly feel more at ease. For example, making his daughter the queen. In the border area of Neverwinter, beside the Redwater River. The sun was setting between the mountains, and the afterglow of the mountains dyed the river a brilliant gold. Smoke rose from the front of the shack, and the faint aroma of porridge made Snaketooth salivate. As he got closer, he even smelled a trace of meat. "I'm here." Tigerclaw saw him as soon as he entered the camp. "Come here." Snaketooth walked quickly to him. "Why, there's meat today?" "Yes, you came back too late and missed the notice. This is a reward from His Majesty." Snaketooth rubbed his sore shoulders. "What reward? Your residential area is still far from completion, isn't it? It's the completion of Kingdom Main Street. Someone came over and said, the border area and the Longsong area are finally connected. I heard that it only takes 1 day to get there on horseback. It used to take 3 days to get there." "I see." Snaketooth nodded. Every time a big project was completed, they could have a bowl of meat porridge. Just like what was advertised on the square, the construction team had not missed a single serving of food since they came to the border area 2 months ago, nor had they deducted any salary. Now he had accumulated 14 silver royals, and by the end of this month, he could have 7 more. If he could gather a gold royal, he would be able to get a house in the city hall and become an official resident of Neverwinter. He would no longer be a nameless rat. But if he wanted to buy that house, he had to work for at least 20 years. Of course, Snaketooth was confident that he could find a better job, such as a furnace worker or a bricklayer. Everything seemed to be changing for the better. His only regret was that he still hadn't seen paper. "When you get the meat porridge, remember to eat quickly," Tigerclaw whispered in his ear. "Otherwise, you won't get a good seat." "What seat?" Snaketooth was confused. In order to celebrate the completion of Kingdom Main Street, there's a new play in the square tonight. I heard it's called The City of Love. The star of the Western region will also appear. My God. I can't wait. You go find someone else, he said disinterestedly. I feel a little tired and don't want to move today. Chapter 574. When they arrived at the square, it was already crowded. It was definitely not an exaggeration. It was the first time for Snaketooth to see so many people gathered in one place. Even when Longsong's stronghold distributed relief rations, there was not such an amazing crowd. He roughly estimated that the number of people who came to watch the performance was probably more than 5,000. According to the locals, this was the third time that the square had been rebuilt. The large flat ground had become a huge bowl with many layers of sunken bowls. He heard that it was called a stepped square. It was reasonable to say that such a large project would take at least 1 or 2 years to complete, but it seemed that it had been repaired in half a month. No one had seen where the soil that should have been dug out had gone. In this way, people could sit on the stone steps while watching the performance without having to stand until their legs were numb. The view was also much better, as long as they could find an empty space. As for those who came late, they could still stand on tiptoe around the square to see what was going on. Fortunately, Tigerclaw squeezed into the last row of stone steps and pushed the two of them away. We finally caught up. Snaketooth covered his chest and carefully sat down next to his friend. The cloth bag in front of his chest contained all his savings for the past 2 months. He had to be vigilant in such a crowded situation. In Longsong's stronghold, such a scene would undoubtedly belong to the Carnival of Rats. Although they had never seen rats in the border area, they still had to be wary of their temporarily transferred peers. When the last trace of sunset was covered by the night sky, there were only a few burning torches left in the square. The whole stage was dark, but no one came to light a bonfire. Snaketooth noticed that there was not even a pile of firewood in the center of the square, which made him feel a little strange. How can I perform without fire? Suddenly, a cluster of bright light bloomed on the stage. It was a little dazzling, but Snaketooth soon adapted to its pure softness. Then came the second cluster and the third cluster. The stage was lit up bit by bit, and the exclamations of the audience became louder and louder, like waves. "This is a factory light. Oh my God, the nightless light. They moved the nightless light here." It was said to be a magical illumination that contained the thunder of heaven. The crystal glass cover that imprisoned the electric light was very expensive. Snaketooth had only seen it a few times when he passed by the industrial area. "What do you mean by a night light?" "That's called an electric light," someone around them said disdainfully. "It consumes electricity, which is produced by the witches' machines." His Majesty originally planned to put this thing in every residential area, but it seems that Miss Witch's ability is not enough to support such a large consumption, so now only the factories are using it. "Where did you hear that?" Tiger Claw asked curiously. "You're not official residents of Neverwinter yet, are you?" The man shrugged. "City Hall has made several announcements on how to properly use electric lights. You should know that it's like a flame. If you don't make contact with it properly, it'll cause a disaster. Not thunder. Both are about the same. Why do you care so much? When you become a subject of His Majesty and finish primary education, you will naturally understand. Is there a way to quickly become an official subject? What was elementary education?" When Snaketooth was about to ask more questions, the crowd suddenly burst into deafening cheers. Tiger Claw grabbed him up. The Star Flower Troupe appeared. "Ms. May! Ms. May! Miss Irene! Mr. Gate!" The crowd shouted the names of the troupe members, and the atmosphere suddenly reached its climax. Looking at such a scene, Snaketooth was suddenly filled with infinite envy. He also wanted to be the center of attention and be warmly shouted by the crowd like them. They were neither nobles nor sages, so it was not out of his reach. When the cheers died down, the play began. It was the first time for Snaketooth to watch a performance of the Star Flower Troupe. He had thought that he would not be interested in the elegant activities that nobles liked, but as the music began, he unconsciously immersed himself in the story on the stage. The protagonists of the story were not nobles. Instead, they were ordinary people like him. There were freedmen, refugees, and even a rat. Some of them had hopes and dreams, and some of them were forced by life to come to Star City at the same time. In this magnificent city, these ownerless people interacted with each other. They helped each other and poured out their thoughts to each other. From the bitterness of leaving home to being lost, and from being lost to pulling themselves together, they slowly found a direction to move forward. In the vast square, there was no other noise except the narration of the actors. Everyone held their breath, as if they had become one with the characters on the stage. In the end, they finally settled down in Star City and lived a stable life. Those who had worked hand in hand in the past became friends and lovers. When the melodious and moving music echoed over the square, Snaketooth felt something in his heart was touched. He pretended to rub his eyes to hide the rolling tears in his eyes, but he found that Tiger Claw was crying his eyes out. Although he was crying, he did not look sad. Not only him, but the people around him also did the same. No one stood up and cheered until the end of the play, as if they were still immersed in the touching story. Even if no one said it, everyone knew that the Star City referred to Neverwinter. Could a rat also gain such feelings? At this moment, a woman of a different race walked out from behind the screen. She had a tall figure and waist-length blue-gray hair. Her white evening dress shone with silver light under the lights, making her look like a figure walking out of a painting. Then she began to sing. Completely different from the previous music, her lyrics were sonorous and powerful, praising the greatness and glory of the workers. It was not like a woman singing at all. Her voice was full of uplifting power. Snaketooth seemed to see the sweat left by him in the houses in the distance, and the foreigners who had devoted themselves here deserved to be remembered by the people. The impact of the play was only fully released at this moment. People were so excited that they could not control themselves. They clapped and shouted with all their might, and under the accompaniment of the singing, the excitement suddenly rose to a new height. They were all His Majesty's subjects. They were glorious workers. They were also the founders of Neverwinter. When it was time to leave, His Majesty and the witches left from the temporary platform on one side of the square. Snaketooth opened his eyes wide, but he could not find paper in the swaying crowd. But he was not as disappointed as he had expected. The singing was still lingering in his ears, and his heart was filled with a kind of spirit. He firmly believed that they would meet again sooner or later. Chapter 575. Boom! When the fire came out of the Type 152 cannon, Iron Axe felt the steel warship under his feet tremble slightly. After a few seconds, a cloud of smoke and dust exploded on the distant city wall, and the dull sound of the bombardment came after a while. When the smoke and dust cleared, he raised his telescope and found that there were huge cracks on the low stone wall. Different from the attack on King City, Fallen Dragon Ridge was located in the south-central part of the kingdom and rarely suffered from foreign attacks. The city wall was also very low, less than half the height of Longsong Stronghold. The top of the wall only allowed one person to pass, so it was impossible to set up large defensive facilities such as catapults. Therefore, the artillery troops had deployed the field cannons in the open space 500 meters away from the city wall. Considering the efficiency of the hundreds of vanguard soldiers entering the city, Iron Axe decided to take action at the same time after opening 3 gaps on the city wall. Any enemy who dared to gather behind the gaps would be mercilessly attacked by the 12-pound cannons. Now that the gate and the northern part of the city wall had been penetrated, Iron Axe would only need to open the last entrance and then he would give the order to attack. It would be great if witches could go with the army, Iron Axe thought regretfully. It was a pity that these precious shells were used against stones. If Lady Nightingale was here, only 3 bags of explosives would be needed to blow up the entire city wall. After all, the enemy's defense was much weaker than that of King City. Iron Axe was amused by his change of mind. Half a year ago, he insisted that the army should complete the task given by His Majesty independently. But since he and the Witch Union worked together to conquer King City, he suddenly felt that it would be perfect if the army could have witches as their eyes or assault troops. "Sir!" The soldier on the lookout shouted, "There's movement in the direction of the city gate. They seem to be gathering horses." Iron Axe moved his telescope and looked at the already broken city gate. Due to the limited view, he could only see some dust rising behind the wall. "Do we need to adjust the cannons to fire there?" Vanner asked. "No. If we want the shells to land there, we'll have to waste at least 2 or 3 more shells." He shook his head. "Since it's horses, I think they want to organize a night to charge and break the blockade of the field cannons. What's there to worry about? But you." Iron Axe turned to look at Countess Spear. "After this charge, I'm afraid there won't be many knight left in your territory. Since they have decided to stand on my brother's side, these people are no longer my knight," she replied calmly. "Let them pay the price for their betrayal." "I see." Iron Axe paused for a moment. "Have you decided what to do with Redwind Passy?" Yesterday, he had just received a secret letter from City Hall, which demanded that all the rebellious nobles except Spear's relatives be escorted to Neverwinter, and those who resisted could be executed on the spot. The First Army had sealed off their territory and was waiting for the City Hall statistics officers to arrive before they could plunder the land. According to the situation, all the nobles would probably end up as miners. Currently, there were several mines in the Stronghold district that were lacking people to exploit. If the family members, trusted aides, and servants were included, there would be at least hundreds of people. Neverwinter would be able to harvest a lot of iron ore. As for the culprit, Redwind Passy, the letter requested that he be handed over to the Earl to deal with. A hint of hesitation appeared on Spear's face. Apparently, she had not made a decision yet. Iron Axe sighed inwardly. If it were him, he would definitely chop off Redwind's head without hesitation. Nothing was more unforgivable than betrayal. "They're coming!" The lookout suddenly shouted. He put these trivial matters aside and continued to watch the battlefield through the telescope. As expected, a group of knight rushed out of the city gate and headed straight for the artillery position. Then, dense gunshots echoed in the wilderness and forest. White smoke floated in front of the camp. More than 20 knights and their squires had not even rushed out 100 meters before they fell into the damp mud one after another. If it was said that when Duke Ryan led his army to invade Border Town, the knights could still pose a slight threat to the First Army, but now, these iron turtles were practically live targets without any ability to fight back. The field cannons did not even need to reload the grapeshot. The revolving rifles and 2 heavy machine guns were enough to keep the enemy firmly on the way of the charge. With another round of gunfire, the thin city wall finally collapsed. Iron Axe gave the order to blow the steam whistle and launch a general attack. The soldiers of the Vanguard Battalion poured out of the line and rushed to the 3 gaps in the city wall. The battle to recapture Fallen Dragon Ridge had officially begun. 2 hours later, the castle and the church fell into the hands of the First Army. The enemy had long been scared out of their wits by the ceaseless roaring of the weapons and did not organize any powerful resistance. Or rather, the group of knight who were instantly killed after leaving the city gate was all the men Redwyn could send out. The church did not show up at all. All the resources in the church had been removed, and Priest Rosad was missing. There were no secret passages or hidden side doors in Fallen Dragon Ridge. There was almost no escape route in the city with its back against the mountain. The soldiers blocked the usurpers on the top floor of the castle. Iron Axe ordered the ministers who were begging for mercy to be dragged away. Then he ordered the soldiers to leave the bedchamber, leaving only the Earl's brother and Countess Spear. Of course, Redwyn was firmly tied to the chair and could not pose any threat to the Countess. "I don't understand." Spear was silent for a long time before she said, "What's in it for you to become the Lord? You and my 3rd brother don't know how to manage government affairs and know nothing about trade. Even if you become the Lord, you'll just be handing over your power to other vassals. Do you think I treat you worse than these outsiders? You're a witch, the devil's pawn." Redwyn yelled, straightening his neck. "Father was wrong about you. You lied to him. But I'm still your sister." "You're not." He gritted his teeth and said, "You're just a bastard adopted by father." What? Spear was stunned. "I heard him say it with my own ears when he was drunk. You're a mistake made by father when he was young, and your surname isn't Parsi at all." Redwyn said indignantly, "Why are you the heir of the family and not me? I'm just taking back what belongs to me from you. You're the real outsider." Spear covered her head, but she could not recall any childhood memories. "The mistake he made? Otherwise, why do you look so different from mother? Don't you remember how you came to Fallen Dragon Ridge? So, you're not my brother either." "Yes, I'm the real heir of the family, the Earl of Fallen Dragon Ridge. Let me go. I demand to be treated as a noble." Spear stumbled out of the bedchamber. Iron Axe hurried to hold her. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She took a deep breath and said, "Take Redwyn Parsi to Neverwinter. He's lost his mind. I think the mine is where he should stay." Chapter 576. Summer came in a heavy rain. The dense rain fell on the glass window, making pitter-patter sounds. The scenery outside the window became blurred, and only the outline of the colors could distinguish the town and the distant mountains. Roland stood in front of the French window, looking at the hazy city under the rain curtain, and the song of "City of Love" still lingered in his ears. He did not expect that the premiere of the play 3 days ago, together with Echo's ability, would have such an amazing effect. The moment the performance ended, the whole audience was silent, and the audience was in tears. Roland had thought that such a scene would only appear in the high-end opera houses in the future. Even a slightly grassroots cinema could not produce such an effect, let alone a group of ordinary people living in a backward era. Even he, who had been bombarded by all kinds of tear-jerking scenes, felt a tremor from the bottom of his heart. This was the power of the Song of Resonance. Of course, Roland knew what an inspiring song meant. In a protracted war, machines would not be tired, but people would. Even if guns and ammunition could be continuously transported to the battlefield, people would be overwhelmed by the endless pressure of survival. Especially when the situation was unfavorable and there were heavy casualties, this kind of emotion was extremely easy to be magnified, and eventually led to the loss of the army's fighting spirit. Throughout history, many ways had been thought of to improve the morale of the troops, such as giving soldiers as much hot food as possible, airdropping ice cream, appointing political commissars and military chaplains, and so on. However, these were too demanding for Roland. The former was a great test of logistics and supply, and the latter was difficult to cultivate a group of backbone members with firm beliefs and good at encouraging others in a short period of time. Echo's ability showed him a shortcut to improve morale. Although it was a little absurd, it was indeed more reliable than other methods to cultivate people into idols. While he was thinking, the office door was suddenly knocked, and Barov walked in. "Your Majesty, the recent housing statistics are out." "What's the result?" "Just as you expected." He spread a list on the mahogany table excitedly. Since the new play was performed, the number of people going to City Hall to apply for renting and buying houses has increased significantly, and the number of marriage registrations has also increased a lot. "Is that so?" Roland returned to the table and checked Barov's statistics. The City of Love was not an aimless entertainment. In addition to advocating the glory of labor and the greatness of construction, it contained another point of view, which was the connection between marriage and stable residence. Instead of letting the outsiders slowly develop a sense of belonging and letting the locals slowly accept these foreign guests through daily contact, it would be better for him to set up a simple standard to promote the integration of refugees from all over the world. This standard was the house. "If you have a house, you are one of us." It seemed very crude, but in times of emergency, it could save a lot of time. If he wanted to gain people's approval and have his own family, he would need a place to stay. Once an outsider had a permanent property, they would consciously protect everything here. Of course, these ideas were not suitable to be said directly. It was better to put them into a play and tell them through a story. "It's like a diamond." An everlasting classic advertising slogan pushed it to the position of the king of gems, a must-have for a wedding, making people completely ignore the fact that it was neither rare nor valuable. The house at least had a high practical value. For this reason, the goal should not be set too far away, which made people feel it was unreachable. 1 golden dragon could be used to rent a house, and 1 golden dragon would be paid as rent every year. When the rent was equal to the price of the house would automatically belong to the tenant. Of course, this goal should not be too easy to achieve. Even the cheapest single room needed 20 golden dragon, which meant that handymen, temporary workers and other workers would need more than 20 years to buy one. This kind of house was less than 15 square meters, which could only hold a bed, a dining table and a toilet. In the future, the landlord would definitely be labeled as a black-hearted real estate developer. All in all, according to Barov's statistics, the publicity of the City of Love was obviously successful. Most of the renting applications came from the previous groups of refugees and serfs who arrived in the border area. Most of the people who requested to buy houses were craftsmen with higher salaries and the impoverished nobles who had brought their properties with them. After they settled here, they would become a part of Neverwinter forever. Therefore, Roland had even thought of the content of the next new play, which was to get married and buy a big house. Well done. He rolled up the list and handed it to Barov. Also, continue to expand the scale of the recruitment of refugees. A sufficient population is the guarantee of the development of Neverwinter, so other tasks can give way to it for the time being. "Yes, Your Majesty." The director smiled and curled his beard. "By the way, call Scroll here. I have something to tell her." "Your Majesty, did you want to see me?" Scroll, who was dressed in a white blouse and a black skirt, walked into the office. "I want to expand the scope of education to include the refugees who have just arrived in Neverwinter." Roland poured a cup of tea for her. "If it's only for the official residents, they have to wait at least 1 year before they can receive primary education. I'm afraid it's difficult to do now." Scroll thought for a moment and said bluntly, "There are too many of them. The existing teachers can't take care of them, and there aren't enough classrooms. If we implement it according to your plan, the Ministry of Education will have to expand its staff by at least 2 or 3 times. I have a way to reduce the pressure on the teachers." Roland paused for a moment. Let them learn by themselves. By themselves? Yes, hold an open class once a week and teach them the most basic reading and writing skills. The rest of the time, let them practice by themselves through a booklet with pictures and pronunciation. There won't be any performance tests or mandatory requirements. It's all up to them. She subconsciously ran her fingers through her wet hair. It may not have any effect. Your Majesty, without supervision, it'll be good if 1 out of 10 people can learn it. More than half will do, Roland said with a smile. I just want to give them a chance. There would always be people who would not be satisfied with a boring, low-paid job and were eager to achieve their goals faster. In order to prevent these people from going astray, it was necessary to guide them to achieve self-improvement in the right way. In the future, the proportion of jobs that required literacy would increase, and the salary would be much higher than that of handyman. If they wanted to get a stable residence as soon as possible and get rid of poverty and tiredness, it would be a good choice to teach themselves how to read and write. Through this method, those who wanted to improve themselves could join the construction of the city as soon as possible. In order to maintain the vitality of a new regime, the most important thing was not to cut off the path of promotion from the bottom. Chapter 577. When Vendi woke up, she found that the heavy rain, which had lasted for a whole night, had finally stopped. She yawned and got out of bed. She opened the window and let in the air, which was mixed with the fragrance of the soil. The garden looked green after being washed by the rain. She could see the drops of water on the olive leaves near the window. The gentle rays of the morning sun shone on the wet grass, reflecting a little bit of light. It was a new day. She put on her bra and coat, went back to the bed, and patted Nightingale's cheek. It's time to get up. Nightingale made a vague nasal sound and turned her face into the pillow. Only at this time, she would not hide in the mist and expose herself in front of her. Vendi smiled and shook her head. Then I'll go eat breakfast first. Nightingale's ears twitched twice. It seemed to be an unconscious tremble, but Vendi knew that Nightingale had heard it. She closed the door quietly and went to the bathroom to wash up. Then she went to the hall to enjoy breakfast. The chef always woke up very early and prepared everyone's food before the sky brightened. The firewood in the stove would burn for a long time, so there was no need to worry about the food cooling halfway. If she wanted to eat something, she could directly take the bowl and spoon to the kitchen. His Majesty called it a buffet, which seemed to be a very common way of eating. But for her, this kind of life was simply luxurious. When she was in the Witch Cooperation Association, Vendi had never thought that one day she could eat as much as she wanted. Food was always in short supply, let alone the taste. Here, there were 3 or 4 kinds of breakfast. Porridge, toast, dried fish and fried eggs were the most common food. Even though she had lived in the castle for more than a year, she still felt a strong sense of happiness and satisfaction every time she ate. She also felt grateful to the person who had brought all this to the witches and allowed the sisters to live freely. When Vendi arrived at the dining hall with a bowl in her hand, the hall was empty. There were several sets of utensils on the long table. Apparently, she was not the first person to come here. The Witch Union had never set a time for people to wake up every day, so people came to enjoy breakfast one after another. Lightning and Maggie were always the first to leave the castle, followed by Anna, Agatha, Lucia, and others. She was the one who was stuck in the middle. Nightingale was the last to arrive. The reason was that His Majesty loved to sleep in. If there was nothing important, he would only get up to deal with government affairs when the sun was high in the sky. Nightingale had also been infected with this habit. Obviously, she used to be the most cautious and sensitive member of the Witch Cooperation Association. Even the slightest sign of trouble would cause her vigilance. But surprisingly, Vendi didn't think it was a bad thing. After breakfast, she went to the first floor of the Witch Building, which had been transformed into the office of the Witch Union. As soon as she entered the building, Belle immediately greeted her. "Sister Vendi, you're here." "Hello, Lady Vendi." "Good morning, lady." The other 2 young women who had been recruited from the city hall bowed. They had graduated from the academy founded by Karl van Bate, and could be regarded as half of Anna and Nana's classmates. They had almost no prejudice against witches. The older one was called Pearl, the younger one was called Gray Rabbit. Together with Lucia's sister Belle, the three of them formed the first group of clerks in the union office. Of course, because Belle was not yet 14 years old, the word temporary was added in front of the title. Anyway, the work here was very easy, so it was a special kind of learning. With their help, the witch union was finally on the right track. Good morning. Vendi nodded and sat at the desk. How's the sales of the first volume of The Witch Diary? It's very popular, Pearl replied with a smile. Everyone is very interested in the story of the little angel in Border Town, especially the soldiers of the First Army. People come to buy it almost every day. In the last week, almost 60 copies have been sold. At this rate, the first 1,000 copies will all be sold in half a month. Hearing this result, Vendi was also a little surprised. After all, as a purely entertainment book, The Witch Diary could neither fill one's stomach nor help one's studies, and it was priced quite high, so it was incredible that it could sell so well. This idea came from His Majesty. The Witch's Diary, as a trilogy of twists and turns and touching dramas, was widely praised by the people of Neverwinter. Therefore, His Majesty decided to draw the witch's life stories in the form of pictures and put them on sale in the convenience market's boutique houses. Unlike before, the protagonists in this story were replaced by witches from the Witch Union. Not only were there beautiful pictures in the book, but there were also well-designed dialogues, which made it look like a drama drawn on paper. And the protagonist of the first volume was Miss Nana Pine. This 15-year-old girl had already become famous in Border Town. She had the ability to heal people's pain and had a natural affinity, so no one would hate an angel-like person. Coupled with His Majesty's strong support for witches and the word of mouth of the First Army, she was even more popular than Anna. After Wendy had finished designing the story, Soraya had drawn it page by page and bound it into a book. The price of the book was set at 5 silver royals. Although the people who needed to understand the witches the most were the refugees, most of them were illiterate, and they weren't interested in spending half a month's salary to buy a beautiful picture book. Therefore, from the very beginning, the target audience of the book was the locals and merchants who came here to trade. The former could spread the story through contact with outsiders, while the latter could bring the deeds of witches to every city in the kingdom. Seeing the popularity of The Witch Diary, Vendi could not help but be greatly encouraged. She could not wait to spread out the pen and paper and began to think about the content of the next book. Have you already thought about the next story? Belle asked curiously. Yes, His Majesty has said that the next album will feature Echo as the main character, Wendy said with a smile. Princess Silvermoon from the southernmost region of the Wild Sand and Earth Fire, a foreign tribe. What do you think of the title? That's amazing. The little girl clicked her tongue. When His Majesty recaptures the southern region, you can also go to the princess' hometown to see what the vast desert looks like. Okay. This was her job, to spread the word of witches and let everyone see their true colors. The Witch Diary was just a part of it. Echo had become one with the Starflower troupe, and the immersive music made the actors praise her. Evelyn opened a tavern next to the Holy Mountain Inn, which mainly provided special blended liquor. It was said that Hummingbird would also join the city hall and become the deputy minister of the construction department. She would also be the second witch to become an official of the city hall after Scroll. Everyone was working hard to build Neverwinter and gradually let the people accept the existence of witches and see them as their own kind. Chapter 578. In the Palace Garden of the City of Glow in the Kingdom of Dawn. Otto Luashi and Oro Tokat sneaked to the back of a rockery. Of course, it was not completely sneaky. At least when they walked into the palace area, they passed through the gate in front of the guards. As long as they did not go into the forbidden area of the palace, they would not be hindered. All the guards knew that the Luashi and Tokat families had always been loyal supporters of the royal family, and after they took over the family, they would also become the ministers in charge of the prince. Hey, are we really going to do this? Otto could not help but feel a little nervous. If Dawn Castle, where the King of Dawn frequented, was a forbidden area, then the bedchamber in the castle was the most forbidden area of all. However, they happened to know a secret passage from the garden to the bedchamber. This narrow underground passage should be one of the several secret escape routes in the palace. When they were young, they had explored it with Andrea and Prince Appin. The four of them even regarded it as their secret base and occasionally held small gatherings in it. Of course, at that time, they were only about 10 years old. Even if they were discovered by His Majesty Moya, he would at most reprimand them. But now that they were adults, what would His Majesty think if they sneaked into the bedchamber? Come on, wasn't it you who proposed that the three families work together to find out why Appin became a stranger? Oro curled his lips. Now that we've come to this critical moment, you actually want to back out? Otto opened his mouth and was speechless for a moment. But I really have to hand it to you. You actually used Andrea's recent situation to get information from Lord Quinn. If it weren't for the fact that you were her playmate since childhood, I think the old man would want to silence you the most if you were someone else. Now is the best time to find out the truth. Are you going to do it or not? Oro asked as he looked around. Otto hesitated for a moment, then gritted his teeth and nodded. Because the news revealed by Earl Quinn was really surprising. Since His Majesty fell ill, the eldest prince often met with an alchemist in the palace, and he would also ask the visitors to leave the palace. It was said that the reason His Majesty could stay awake for 2 to 4 hours every day was because of that person's special medicine to suppress the disease. As the Prime Minister, Andrea's father naturally had the opportunity to enter the bedchamber and ask His Majesty about political affairs. He had seen the alchemist once. She was a young woman, and her whole body was covered by a black veil. Only her dull silver-gray pupils could be seen. After hearing this, Otto suddenly thought of the church. If he had not gone to Grey Castle, he would not have thought of this. However, after meeting Roland Wimbledon, the news of the church secretly training the Pure Ones and trying to overthrow the Four Kingdoms in order to accumulate power for the Battle of Armageddon had taken root in his heart. In the end, he did not tell this information to Earl Quinn. After all, the impact of this matter was too great. He had to confirm that his guess was correct before making the next decision. After learning from the Earl that the alchemist would appear today, Otto immediately thought of the secret passage that he often used to come and go as a child. Since it was impossible to get the support of the first prince, he could only find the truth in this way. Seeing him nod, Oro immediately got to work. He pushed aside the knee-high weeds and used a dagger to pry up a cover disguised as an ordinary stone behind the artificial hill. A rusty iron railing soon appeared before the two of them. This fence was about the length of an arm and could only be opened from the inside with a key. However, this was not a problem for the two, who were already prepared. Oro took out a glass bottle from his waist bag, opened the lid, and poured the yellowish-brown liquid in the bottle on the lock. A burst of choking white light suddenly appeared, and the fence that was stained by the liquid sizzled like butter thrown into a hot pot. This was the molten iron water made by the alchemist master of the City of Glow. A fist-sized bottle cost more than 10 golden dragon coins. However, the process was not as the alchemist claimed, which could turn the iron into a pool of black water in the blink of an eye. After pouring 2 bottles, the shrunken lock finally fell off the fence. Then the two bent over and crawled into the hole. Oro did not forget to turn back and close the slate. After crawling for about 10 steps, the passage became a little wider and was wide enough for people to walk on. Otto skillfully fumbled for the oil lamp hanging on the wall and lit it with flint. The faint light illuminated the stone walls and the arched ceiling. After more than 10 years of leaving here, the secret passage remained the same as before, as if time had stopped here. When they passed by the lounge halfway, they could still see the soft mats and wine glasses that they had brought in for the party. As the path curved back and forth and climbed upward, Otto Luashi knew that he had entered the Morning Light Castle. The castle wall was divided into 2 layers, like a sandwich. The empty space in the middle was reserved for secret rooms and secret passages. When the two reached the end of the secret passage, they came to the back of the fireplace in the bedroom of the bedchamber. Since the mechanism had to be activated from the bedchamber, they could not directly enter the bedroom. However, through a small gap in the trapdoor, they could roughly see the scene in the bedroom. And if it was quiet enough, They could also hear the voices of people talking in the room. Otto extinguished the oil lamp and put his eyes close to the gap. The fireplace was facing a large bed, on which lay the King of Dawn, His Majesty Deacon Moya. The eldest prince, Appin, was pacing back and forth beside the bed, looking a little anxious. The two looked at each other, nodded tacitly, and carefully leaned against the stone slab of the trapdoor. Apparently, His Highness was waiting for the alchemist to come. After about an hour, there was finally a new movement in the room. They immediately turned their heads and squinted. Two women walked into the bedroom. One of them was the black-veiled alchemist mentioned by Earl Quinn, and the other was probably the alchemist's assistant. She carried a satchel, wore a red and white robe and cloak, and had beautiful blonde curly hair. "You're late," Appin said unhappily. "Sorry," the blonde woman said with her hand on her chest. "Something happened on the way and we were delayed." "Don't talk so much. We just need to wake up his father," the black-veiled woman replied coldly. "It doesn't matter if it's earlier or later." "You can't say that. We still have to rely on His Highness's help." She took out a green porcelain bottle from her satchel and said, "Maintaining a harmonious relationship is good for both of us, isn't it? Give me the medicine." Appin took 2 steps forward, but was stopped by the black-veiled woman. "Have you forgotten our agreement? This medicine has to be fed by me, and in exchange, you have to meet His Holiness's requirements." "His Holiness?" Otto was shocked. This honorific was only used when addressing the Pope. Was she really sent by the Church? Chapter 579. I remember I told you a month ago to close all the roads to the Kingdom of Wolfheart as soon as possible. Why are there still so many refugees entering? The black-veiled woman asked coldly. "Even if they crawl, your knight should have reached the border by now." 09 Smalch say net. "You know there are a lot of refugees there." Appin clenched his fists. "If we prohibit them from crossing the border, most of them will starve to death on the road. There are no cities nearby and no places that can provide food. If they go back the way they came, it will take them at least a week to return to Wilderness Town." "They? What does that have to do with you?" Appin interrupted impatiently. "Since they abandoned their kingdom, they only have themselves to blame, whether they starve or die of thirst. You'd better focus on your father. Or do you want to break the contract?" "Abandon my kingdom? That's ridiculous." Otto thought angrily. "It's because of the war you started that these people have nowhere to go." When it came to breaking the contract, Appin was obviously hesitant. After a while, he said, "The rest of the roads will be completely closed in a week. That's all right. But if they don't take the official road, but cross the border through the wilderness and mountains, I won't stop them. Of course, we won't force you to do something you can't do." The black-veiled woman took the porcelain bottle and took a sip. Then she walked to the bed and bent down. The two people in the secret passage widened their eyes, but they could not see what she was doing. After a while, she looked up and said, "That's good. He'll wake up in an hour, just like before." "Do I have to feed him the medicine by mouth?" "It has to be me." She shrugged. "Don't worry. As long as you do as we agreed, the King of Dawn will definitely recover and even be healthier than before. The next time we come here will be after you completely close the border." The blonde woman smiled. "Don't let His Holiness down, Your Highness." Just as they were about to turn around and leave, Appin suddenly asked, "You're witches, right?" The two people stopped. "Is it because of the witch's magic that the medicine has to be fed by you?" He said slowly, "I can't find any other explanation. Although it sounds unbelievable that there are witches in the church, what you've done is no different from the devil's behavior." "Is that what you wanted to say?" "Come out," cried the prince. These words startled Otto and Oro, but then they saw several guards in half-body armor crawling out of the wardrobe and under the bed, surrounding the pure witch. "Oh," the blonde woman whistled. "Admirable rashness. And it's meaningless." The black veil saint shook her head and said, "It seems that the church has not given you a deep enough impression." "Stop pretending," Appin roared. "Indeed, the scourge you've shown is incredibly powerful, but they're not here now." There are as many god stones as you want in the palace. Do you think you can escape? Wait. The blonde woman smacked her lips. Did you arrange for the witches we met on the way? That's not a real witch, it's just a trick commonly used by rats. Appin snapped as if he was venting his long-suppressed anger. Being led away by a handful of magic fire stones, your abilities are just SOSO. Without the protection of Scourge, witches are no different from ordinary people in front of the god stones. It's not too late to hand over the medicine and kneel down to beg for mercy. If you don't want to have your limbs cut off, all your teeth pulled out, and become a human medicine pot, do as I say. Lady will definitely be very angry if she hears your words, she sighed. Not only is the witch a fake, but she was also ridiculed by a young boy for her ability. Next time, it's best not to let her see you, otherwise you may suffer. What? The prince was completely infuriated by the other party's indifferent attitude. I hope you can still be so stubborn in prison. Guards, take them down. Otto pressed his face tightly against the slate, hoping to see more, but soon his body stiffened and he could not believe his eyes. Before the guards could touch the pure witch, they all suddenly turned their swords and cut their own necks. Blood gushed out like a rainstorm and splashed everywhere. The guards fell to the ground without a sound, and the smell of blood suddenly floated in the room. Appin, on the other hand, could not stop trembling, as if he had seen something extremely terrible. His previous momentum and anger instantly left him. After a while, wet marks appeared in the middle of his pants, and his urine flowed down his legs. Don't go too far. The blonde woman shrugged. We still need him for the time being. It's just a small lesson. The Black Veil Saint snapped her fingers. The prince sat on the ground as if he had just woken up from a dream and stepped back while trembling. Don't worry, you're still alive, she said sarcastically. But I can't guarantee next time. Why? There's obviously a god stone of retaliation here. Appin stammered. How can witches? Because we're pure witches. The blonde woman smiled faintly. To be honest, isn't it better to follow the agreement? Your father will be safe and sound in the end, and the Kingdom of Dawn will survive for a while. When the church takes over Grey Castle, you can still become one of us. Even if the kingdom will be taken over by us, you can still enjoy a rich and comfortable life and your people can be free from the pain of war. Why do these stupid things now? Before leaving the room, she turned back and added, By the way, remember to ask someone to clean up this place. Your father will wake up soon. You don't want him to wake up to a bloody scene in the bedroom, do you? Otto felt his back was soaked with cold sweat. The pure witch who was not afraid of the god's stone and the church's plan to take over Grey Castle first, and then the Kingdom of Dawn made him feel a chill in his heart. The church had long regarded the four kingdoms as a piece of fat meat in its mouth. This was exactly what His Majesty had said. When the King of Dawn woke up, the blood-stained carpet was covered with cloth and Appin was the only one left in the room. He fed his father mouthful after mouthful of warm oatmeal, and the latter seemed to have forgotten about his illness as he chatted about government affairs and family affairs. It was no different from the happy and harmonious family scene that they usually had. Otto did not even dare to breathe when he saw this strange scene. They waited until evening before leaving the secret passage. What should we do? Even Oro, who was usually calm, looked frightened. Tell Earl Quinn, and our father, he said through gritted teeth. This is no longer a problem that you and I can solve. But you've seen that the pure witches don't even care about the god's stone. Even if the three families know the truth, what can they do? Chapter 580. A matter of life and death. Yorko's life had been very comfortable recently. The King of Dawn had not recovered for a long time, and His Highness seemed to have forgotten about him, but the nobles did not ignore the ambassador from the neighboring country. He attended luxurious banquets, had fun with Denise, and even visited some high-end clubs and brothels under her recommendation. He tasted the richness and unique charm of the capital city of the kingdom, which he could not enjoy in Grey Castle. It was because of the title of Wimbledon's ambassador. Although an ambassador was equivalent to a count, in a sense, it was more useful than a count. After all, The latter could only do whatever he wanted in his own fief, while the former could enjoy the courtesy of the upper-class nobles in other kingdoms. He was deeply aware of the benefits of a high status. In addition, Hillfox, the bodyguard appointed by His Majesty, was also an amazing person. No matter who he dealt with, Hillfox would sneak into his bedroom 2 or 3 nights later and nag him about the identity, status, and benefits of that person. If it was a big shot, Hill could even find out their preferences. With Hill's help, Yorko was even more at home in the noble circle. Under Hill's arrangement, the purchase of slaves had also made great progress. After Yorko made Denise comfortable, he whispered in her ear, and she immediately agreed to his suggestion. She used the existing caravans to open up a way to redeem the slaves. She would buy the refugees needed by King Wimbledon from other slave traders, and then transport them to Grey Castle. The prerequisite was that the slaves must be given the status of free people and not be resold as goods. Of course, as a merchant, she did not forget to negotiate a good price even when she was overflowing with passion. She could not charge the difference in the purchase price, but she could not save on the transportation fee. After adding up the cost of manpower, food, carriages, and other expenses as well as the profit, she finally came to a price of 10 silver royals for each person transported. Having been entrusted by Hill, Yorko naturally agreed without hesitation. He patted his chest and said that no matter how expensive it was, he could not let these talented people become slaves. His attitude undoubtedly deepened Denise's good impression, and the two returned to the bed and passionately rolled around for a while. After that, Yorko sent Sheer to discuss this matter in detail, so that he could no longer care about these trivial business matters. He heard that the first batch of 25 slaves purchased yesterday had already left with the caravan. In this way, he could still get an extra 125 silver royals as promised by His Majesty. Was there a better position than being able to collect money while lying on the bed? Ambassador, you are the best. While Yorko was wondering where he should go today, a servant knocked on the door and came in. Your Excellency, Lord Otto, the eldest son of the Luashi family, wants to see you. Otto Luashi? He was no stranger to this family name. It was one of the 3 major families in the Kingdom of Dawn, second only to the Moya royal family in power. Denise had also warned him not to go to the 3 major families, especially the Quinn family. Otherwise, even his identity as an ambassador would not be able to protect him. However, Yorko did not have to worry about this at the moment. He had always been very cautious when it came to these kinds of questions. The purpose of the other party's visit should be to invite him to the banquet. Invite him in. A young man walked into the study. He first looked around, then took the initiative to close all the windows before sitting in a chair. He looked a little anxious and his eyes were dark. Apparently, he had stayed up late last night and barely slept. Yorko did not approve of this kind of behavior of emptying one's body for pleasure. In his opinion, restrained pleasure could make both men and women cheerful and healthy, which was a beneficial behavior. However, spending energy all night would only overdraft the body's potential. Prince Appin was a typical example. Even his face was extremely pale. At this rate, he was afraid that he would not be able to find pleasure by the age of 30. However, the man did not speak for a long time, which made Yorko feel quite strange. This was not in accordance with the etiquette. A member of a major family should not be so rude. After a while, Yorko had to take the initiative to speak. You must be Lord Otto Luashi. I wonder. You can contact His Majesty Roland Wimbledon, right? The man suddenly interrupted. I have an important information to tell him. Yorko was startled. Information? It's all written in here. Otto took out a letter from his arms and put it in front of Yorko. Then he folded 10 golden dragon pieces on it. This money is your reward. Please be sure to give this letter to your king. This information concerns the survival of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Yorko gasped. It concerns the survival of the Kingdom of Grey Castle? This is too exaggerated. He did not come to his senses until Otto stared at him with burning eyes. I see. Don't worry. I'll give it to His Majesty. Be sure to deliver it as soon as possible. Otto stood up and left after repeatedly urging him. Judging from his anxious look, he did not seem to be lying. Yorko hurriedly put the 10 golden dragon pieces into his arms, but he did not want to touch the letter. In his opinion, this thing was a hot potato. It was better to ask Hill how to deal with it first. When Hill Fox quietly walked into the bedroom, Yorko told him everything that had happened during the day. The latter pondered for a moment, took out a knife out of nowhere and neatly opened the letter. "Hey, what are you doing?" Yorko was shocked. It's a felony to open His Majesty's letter without permission. "Shoo," Hill made a shushing gesture. "If the information inside is really as important as he said, we naturally can't use the conventional way to send the letter. It will take at least a month to send someone from the City of Dawn to the Western region. Moreover, it's very dangerous on the way, which is prone to accidents. What does that have to do with you opening the letter? Do you still remember the gray falcons that I've been raising? They're the fastest messengers. It only takes them 2 or 3 days to fly from here to the City of Dawn," Hill explained. "After changing the messengers there, the letter can be delivered to His Majesty within a week. But they can't carry such a big letter in flight, so I have to read the content and rewrite it in secret." "Gray falcons can also send letters? Not carrier pigeons?" Yorko was surprised. "I thought you raised them for hunting. They're much smarter than carrier pigeons." Hill opened the letter and soon looked serious. "I can't believe there's such a thing. What's written in the letter? Do you really want to know?" He turned around. "Forget it." Yorko coughed twice. "I prefer to have a good sleep every day." Chapter 581. Roland received a letter from the Duke of the Northern Region, Car Vane Comte. Along with the letter was a contract with a fingerprint on it, which clearly expressed the Northern Region's loyalty to Roland. The content of the letter was more trivial. First, it asked Roland when the coronation ceremony would be held, so that he could prepare to set off to congratulate him, which was also the custom of every coronation. Second, it asked about the new policy, such as how to implement it, the remaining power of the nobles, the inheritance, and the management scope of the city hall. These were all within Roland's expectations. What surprised him was the last point. At the end of the letter, the Duke made a marriage request to Roland, and the whole page was full of praise for his daughter Edith's beauty and talent, saying that she could handle domestic and foreign affairs in an orderly manner, and that she was the best candidate for the queen. Roland could not help but laugh when he read these words. "What are you laughing at?" Nightingale's voice came from the direction of the recliner. "An interesting, father." He picked up the letter and said, "Have a look at this." Nightingale came out of the mist and took the letter. After reading it, she frowned and asked, "You won't say yes to him, will you?" "Of course not," Roland said casually. "I don't need a political marriage to maintain the stability of the throne. Judging from the letter, I dare not let her into the castle. Otherwise, who knows who will be the king?" "That sounds like the truth," Nightingale said, obviously relieved. "Hey, don't you trust me?" "It's not a question of trust. You know witches can't." She paused and said, "After awakening, we can no longer be considered complete women." "I don't think so." Roland shook his head. The infertility would gradually disappear with the development of civilization, and the appearance, physical fitness, and incredible abilities brought by magic power would become more and more important. As long as human beings could survive, the witches would inevitably rise. Fortunately, they were born in human beings and there was no specific way to stimulate their awakening, so there was an opportunity for them to merge. Just as he was about to launch into a long exposition of his views, a flying messenger flew into the room through the open window, and with 2 flutters alighted on the desk. Its claws were tied with a yellow strip of cloth, which meant that the secret message came from the old king's city. Roland swallowed his words. He took out a dried fish from the drawer and threw it to the gray falcon, who was shaking its head for a reward. He then untied the cloth and took out the folded oiled paper. Due to the limited size of the secret letter, the contents were usually very concise. The first sentence of the letter gave him a huge shock. "The palace of the Kingdom of Dawn has been infiltrated by a pure witch." Her ability can ignore the god's stone of retaliation. A witch immune to the influence of the god's stone? As far as he knew, only extraordinaires who had strengthened their bodies could do this. Apart from them, there were also senior demons known as magic slayers. Roland continued to read, only to find that the news was more shocking than the previous one. Prince Appin tried to resist, but the guard committed suicide under the control of the pure witch. The church's goal is to stabilize the Kingdom of Dawn so that they can focus on attacking Grey Castle. Otto Luashi and Oro Tokat witnessed all this. The three families hope to get your help. He suddenly felt that his plan to recover the southernmost region had to be greatly adjusted. 3 days later, Roland held a strategy meeting in the castle parlor. The attendees included City Hall Director Barev, 1st Army Commander Iron Axe, Chief Knight Carter, Longsong Consul Perot, Witch Union Representatives Vendi and Agatha, Sleeping Island Witches Representative Sylvie, and Edith, Pearl of the Northern Region. That's the basic situation. Roland roughly described the contents of the secret letter. We can't verify the contents, but if everything in the letter is true, Grey Castle will undoubtedly face the biggest challenge before the Battle of Divine Will. For the sake of safety, the battle plan in the southernmost region has to be temporarily suspended. He looked at Iron Axe. Is there any problem? As the chief hero of the spring offensive, Iron Axe quickly captured Willow Town and Fallen Dragon Ridge according to the plan, so that the gateway town connecting Neverwinter and the southern region fell into the hands of Roland. He had planned to make persistent efforts to expand the territory before the arrival of autumn and incorporate the territory of the Sand Nation into the territory of the kingdom. Echo and Iron Axe were the key figures between the two clans. As members of the Majin clan, they could play a role as a buffer during racial conflicts. Iron Axe was also very eager to return to Iron Sand City to take revenge for the framing years ago, so letting him lead the army to occupy the southernmost region was also the best reward for him. He might be disappointed if the battle plan was suspended now. Yes, Your Majesty. However, Iron Axe's expression did not change and he answered very decisively. In addition, I suggest that the 1st Army stationed in Fallen Dragon Ridge be replaced with newly trained soldiers. They will have no problem dealing with the nobles, and the 1st Army can also concentrate its strength to stop the church. That's it. Roland nodded approvingly, got up and walked to the big map behind him. Now we have two main problems. First, we don't know when the enemy will attack, and second, we don't know where they will attack from. Originally, there was only one way for the church to invade Grey Castle, which was to go straight to King City from Coldwind Ridge in the northern region. But now the Kingdom of Dawn is threatened by the church, so it's possible that the Judgment Army will attack Grey Castle from the border of the Kingdom of Dawn. Do you have any good solutions? No matter where they come from, they will first pass through the northern region of the kingdom. Barev spoke first. Coldwind Ridge, Deep Valley Town, City of Evernight and Steep Cliff City are all the territories of Duke Carwin. I suggested that Miss Edith should carry the news to her father, and that she should remain in the north to watch the enemy. It would be safer. But, Your Majesty, Barev rubbed his hands. Can we stop the church? Barev's timid question made everyone roll their eyes. Edith said bluntly, if His Majesty says we can't stop them, are you going to beg the church for forgiveness? What nonsense are you talking about? As the director of City Hall, at least I have to prepare for the worst. She ignored Barev and looked at Roland. Your Majesty, it's necessary to send people to monitor all the roads, but it doesn't mean it's a good method. It's slow to react, and when the enemy is found, it means the enemy has already started to move. It's difficult to buy enough time for you. Do you have a better solution? Of course, Edith replied confidently. Send people to Hermes. The holy city of the church? Carter frowned. What's the use of that? Will the Pope inform you when he decides to send troops? And the people there are all believers and fanatics, so it's difficult for spies to sneak in, Perot added. Chapter 582. Go on. Roland could not help but feel interested. The terrain of Hermes is very unique. The impassable mountain range has left a gentle slope here, below which is the old holy city, and the new holy city is built on the plateau. The environment there is very bad. In addition to using the natural barrier to resist demonic beasts, it is not suitable for living, let alone reclaiming the land. Therefore, all the food and materials needed by the new holy city need to be provided by the old holy city, but the land of the latter is only enough to feed more than 20,000 people at the foot of the mountain. Edith walked to Roland and pointed to the map. This means that they need to collect food from other places, such as the churches and church organizations in the nearby cities. Most of them will buy a piece of land, or rent wheat fields from the lords to cultivate. Every autumn, dozens of carriages from the four kingdoms will arrive every day, in order to replenish the supplies of the new holy city on the plateau. Now, a small town similar to a market has been formed outside the old holy city, where the carriages can rest and the church can maintain the order of entering the city. In other words, if they decide to send the judgment army on a large scale, they will absolutely not be able to escape the eyes of these merchants. Even if the army has not officially taken action, we can calculate the timing of the other side's action through the changes in the scale of the material transport. When she spoke, her eyes swept over the people present one by one to make sure that they were paying attention to her. The confidence she showed was rarely seen in women in this era. Roland thought, it seems that Carcont's letter was not completely boastful. At least in terms of her demeanor, she is worthy of the title of Pearl of the Northern region. How do you know so clearly? Barav shook his beard. It's as if you came from the holy city. I lived there for a period of time, Edith replied without hesitation. Because of the convention of the months of demons. What's that? Roland asked doubtfully. He had a little impression of this term, but he could not remember the specific content. You don't know? She blinked. In order to help the church fight against the disaster of the months of demons, the four kingdoms need to send troops to support the holy city of Hermes and fight together with the Judgment Army. Your brother Gerald Wimbledon is the commander of the border army in Grey Castle, and I have also fought under him. But there seems to have been an accident last year. I heard that the coalition army of the four kingdoms was almost wiped out, and the Judgment Army of the church also suffered heavy losses. There is such a thing, Perrault echoed. My friend Ren Med completed his knight test there. Does every knight have to fight against demonic beasts to be conferred the title? Roland looked at Carter. Why haven't I heard you mention it? Ahem, this is a tactic often used by knights in small places. Carter spread out his hands and said, the knights of the king's city have their own rules, and in addition to bravery, loyalty and knowledge are also very important aspects, which can't be proven by just fighting with a ferocious monster. By the way, Your Majesty. Edith did not refute Carter's words but turned to look at Roland. Can you let me observe how your army fights? I've always been curious about how you managed to capture King's City within a day. If I can understand the First Army's fighting style, perhaps I can be of help in future battles. However, this was not a big problem. The current weapons and equipment of the First Army could no longer be imitated at a glance. With the advancement of technology, the increasingly costly nature of war had gradually manifested. Without a complete logistics supply system and industrial production guarantee, even if the enemy was given a batch of guns, they would not be able to use them. Moreover, by showing his strength to the northern region loyalists, not only could he boost their confidence, but he could also deter them from having any thoughts that they should not have. Thinking of this, Roland nodded to Iron Axe and said, "Go ahead and arrange it." Your Majesty, I suggest that you issue a decree to every town in Grey Castle to expel the church in the name of the king. Barav did not want to lag behind Edith. Otherwise, once the war breaks out, the church will become a stronghold for them to devour the kingdom step by step. I'm afraid that not many lords will be willing to do this. Churches are usually big tax collectors, and the power displayed by the church is frightening, so they tend to follow the wind. Edith shrugged and said, "This is also the usual behavior of the nobles. It's better than doing nothing." The directors stared at her. Of course. Edith chuckled disapprovingly. The northern region will fully support this decree. Then let's do it. Roland nodded and said, "This may be a difficult battle." Sylvie looked rather worried. You'd better inform Lady Tilly. The witches of Sleeping Island may be able to help you. Hearing her words, Roland could not help but smile bitterly in his heart. Sleeping Island's problems were no less than his own. After sending the information about the Bloodfang Association, he had not yet received a reply from them. If the internal conflicts were not resolved and Tilly led her subordinates to help, Sleeping Island might be in big trouble. However, what Sylvie said also made sense. The most effective way to deal with pure witches with strange abilities was to deal with the witches themselves. I'll write to her. Don't forget to prepare God's stones of retaliation for your common people, Agatha added. During the hundreds of years of the Union, there have been some witches with incredible abilities. Common people without God's stones were defenseless in front of them. One such witch is enough to kill thousands of people. Even flintlocks and cannons won't work. Let's not talk about how easy it is for a witch like Nightingale to get close to your army. Some of her abilities even take effect the moment you see her. Roland was speechless. The First Army had 5,000 people including the reserve troops. Where could he get so many God's stones of retaliation? Even if he used the witch's blood to break down the God's stone mine, he was afraid that he would not be able to get enough in a short time. Your Majesty, we can ask the church for these God's stones, Iron Axe suggested. If we only attack the churches and believers, it won't affect the civilians and the nobles won't dare to openly oppose you. In this way, we can realize Lord Barev's suggestion and get a large number of God's stones for free. The corner of Barev's mouth twitched. You mean we'll send the First Army to rob them? We'll uproot the enemy's stronghold, just like breaking the fangs of a poisonous snake, he corrected. And Miss Edith will be able to see the First Army's fighting style directly. This kind of battle will be more convincing than a drill. I think so too, Edith said with a smile. We'll kill many birds with one stone, Roland finally said. Then let's call it Operation Tooth Extraction. Chapter 583. At night, Vendi called all the witches to her bedroom. The originally spacious room was suddenly filled with people. This scene was familiar. Just a year ago, she had also gathered the sisters here and told them about the town's situation to ease their anxiety. At that time, there were only 7 sisters who had escaped from the barbarian land. They had lost their wits and were full of confusion and fear for the road ahead. Many of them had even come to this border town with the idea of, I've had enough, no matter what fate I face next. Survival was a difficult thing for them, not to mention the church that hung over the witches' heads like a shadow. But now, everyone's expression was completely different from a year ago. Not only survival, but also a free life had gradually become the consensus of the sisters. There was no oppression or hostility from others. There was no need to worry about food and safety. This place had become the witches' holy mountain. As long as they could help His Majesty defeat the church, all the nightmares would disappear, and the witches would usher in true liberation. When everyone's eyes shifted to Vendi, she said, "The church is coming." There was not much information in the daytime meeting. She quickly finished the contents of the secret letter, and there was a brief silence in the bedroom. Will His Majesty win? After a moment, Mystery Moon muttered in a low voice, "I can stay by the factory all day to generate electricity for him." "Come on, then he'll have to send someone to take care of you." Lily curled her lips in disdain. "Don't give him trouble at this time." "No way." The witches let out a burst of light laughter. With the first person to speak, the others naturally followed suit. "I'll also redouble my efforts to produce white wine." Evelyn clenched her fists. "But we don't need that much wine to fight against the church." Is that so?" "I don't think His Majesty will lose." Even the extraordinary Ashes was severely injured by Carter? Hummingbird said bluntly, "The God's Punishment Army is not as powerful as Ashes." "Really? Even the invincible Ashes lost?" Softfeathers, who rarely spoke, was surprised. "It's not considered a loss. Carter was knocked unconscious and Ashes couldn't move. I think it's a draw." "As far as I know, this is an unfair competition," Agatha argued. "Transcendence will only be stronger when they use weapons of the same level." But there is only one transcendent on Sleeping Island, and there are thousands of soldiers with guns. Wait, you're arguing in the wrong direction. Scroll shook her head helplessly. We're talking about the church and His Majesty. Vendi's heart was slightly relieved. Although everyone was worried, no one was afraid of fighting against the church. This would have been absolutely unimaginable a year ago. After all, the enemy's power was as unshakable as a mountain, and none of the witches who dared to fight against them had survived. The Witch Cooperation Association had to hide everywhere, and the only way to get rid of their pursuit was to go to the inaccessible, impassable mountain range. Of course, this change in mentality had a lot to do with the fact that His Majesty had never lost a foreign war. In short, this war is related to the future of the Witch Union. She took a deep breath. If His Majesty completely defeats the church, have you ever thought about what will happen? Everyone immediately shut their mouths, but their eyes flashed with an indescribable light. The whole kingdom, even the whole continent, witches can live a stable life. And in His Majesty's territory, we can also create a new world together with ordinary people and enjoy the same honor and status. This is also what he always said. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. Vendi paused. But according to His Majesty's past habits, we don't have to work too hard. Just work as usual. As long as we have this confidence, we won't fail. She didn't know anything too profound, and her ability and knowledge weren't the most outstanding in the Witch Union. His Majesty had put her in charge of the Witch Union, and this was the only thing she could do. Every time before a battle, His Majesty would give an impassioned speech in front of the First Army. She couldn't think of any inspiring way, so she could only tell everyone what was in her heart. Being considerate of others is more important than anything else. She firmly remembered Scroll's words. This is our home, and also the turning point to change the fate of witches. I'm willing to sacrifice everything for it. After finishing her words, Vendi stretched out her left hand with the back of her hand facing up. Scroll was the first to press her hand. Then Nightingale and Anna. For His Majesty and Neverwinter. Everyone gathered in a circle and folded the back of their hands one by one. The witches of the Bloodfang Association hesitated for a while, as if they didn't know whether they would be accepted by everyone, until Leaf pulled them into the circle. With the direct palm contact, they were truly integrated into the group. I really don't want to deal with such a group of annoying people before fighting against the demons. Although Agatha said so, she still stretched out her hand. Finally, Vendi put her right hand on everyone's hand and looked around. For the Witch Union. For the Eternal Holy Mountain. After everyone left, only she and Nightingale were left in the bedroom. As Vendi closed the door, she suddenly felt a gust of cold wind behind her. She turned around and saw that Nightingale had opened the window and was sitting on the windowsill, looking at the night sky. The night wind blew her curly hair, and at the same time, there was a faint fragrance. Are you also worried about the war? Vendi walked to the window. Worried? Nightingale tilted her head, her eyes shining with a scorching light under the light of the stone of lighting. I'm afraid that I'll laugh out loud. Laugh out loud? It was only at this moment that she noticed the sharp aura overflowing from Nightingale's body. It was very rare for someone to be like Nightingale, who could release her magic without using her ability. Moreover, they were no longer unpredictable things, but like sharp blades, forming an inaccessible area. It was as if the foggy world was eroding the surrounding space bit by bit and gradually began to affect the world. Since coming to Border Town, this feeling became more and more obvious. For the enemy, this was also a sign of danger. I've been waiting for a long time to be able to take revenge on the church, Nightingale said slowly. Those sisters who died unjustly in the hands of the church must also be looking forward to this day. I've tasted the taste of revenge, and that feeling is unforgettable. It was hard to imagine that she was the same person as the woman who stayed in bed in the morning. Fortunately, she was not the enemy of her sisters. Vendi tried to reach out her hand. The moment she touched Nightingale, the sharp feeling disappeared, and she held her in her arms. You can do what you want, but remember to protect His Majesty, and protect yourself, understand? Yes. Nightingale closed her eyes and replied softly. I will. I'm opening my WeChat official account. Search for the official account, Two Eyes Little, or Ermu85. Dear friends, remember to follow me. Chapter 584. Once the war order was issued, Neverwinter immediately operated at high efficiency. Sacks of wheat plundered from Fallen Dragon Ridge quickly filled the empty granary. Some of them would be shelled and ground into dry rations, which would be distributed to the soldiers participating in the war. In addition, there were also guns and ammunition. The new recruits recruited during the months of demons had also completed their basic training. Those who performed well would be integrated into the First Army and receive brand new weapons and uniforms. The ordinary soldiers would temporarily serve as reserve troops and be assigned to the cities occupied by Roland to replace the veterans stationed there. In this way, the available military strength of Neverwinter was rapidly expanded to 5,000 people, which in theory was almost the same as the number of judgment soldiers of the church. However, due to the limited transportation capacity, the further away from the western region, the fewer people could be sent to the battlefield. Considering that the task of the tooth extraction operation was not difficult, Roland finally set the number of troops to be 1,500, which would be commanded by Iron Axe. In this operation, the advisor department was moved into the system of the First Army. The main members were the nobles, knight and ordinary people in the Longsong area, such as Sir Schilt, the father of the Light of Dawn, and the chief guard of the Honeysuckle family, Traff. They had either been baptized by gunfire or served in the Second Army. Although these people were not trained in the military, Roland still let them follow the army with the idea that they could learn while building the army, and that they could have a few more people to give advice and suggestions. However, they did not have the actual power to command, so it was up to Iron Axe to decide whether their deductions and plans would be adopted. In addition, during the tooth extraction operation, they might encounter the church's pure witches, so Magic Eye, Sylvie and Confinement Cage Iffy would also follow the army. The former could detect magic power and warn the enemy's position, while the latter could capture the pure witches if permitted. Moreover, Sylvie would also bring the sigil of listening with her so that she could get in touch with Neverwinter at any time. In this way, an army with modern military structure, firepower and communication capabilities was gradually taking shape. The tooth extraction operation mainly targeted Redwater City, Silver City and Impassable Fort, the three nearest cities to the western region. It would take about 4 days to prepare and set off. In addition to selecting reliable personal guards to go to the Old Holy City, Roland spent the rest of the time discussing various details of the war with the church with the army commanders and the advisor department. For example, the location of the attack that was difficult to decide. On this issue, everyone had their own opinions, and it was difficult for anyone to convince the other party. Brian, the commander of the firearm battalion, was a firm supporter of attacking the western region, and he had a very good reason for doing so. If the battle starts in the western region, the First Army will be able to fully display their firepower advantage. With the support of a large number of paddle steamers, we can replenish our ammunition and manpower within a day. No matter how long we fight, we have the confidence to win. At the same time, this distance is extremely disadvantageous to the church. As long as they do not break through the defense line within a month, they will probably not even have food to eat. Edith, on the other hand, was the advocate of the foreign war faction. Can't even eat? Do you know how many believers there are in Grey Castle? Even if the entire church was burned down, as long as the Pope gave the order, these people would bring all kinds of food to the door. Moreover, the middle of July was the wheat ripening season. As long as the army of judges occupied 1 or 2 cities, they would be able to obtain a steady stream of supplies. This was not the scariest part. Did the church not possess the pill of madness that could turn normal people into monsters? What if they forced the people of Grey Castle to take this pill to exhaust the strength of the First Army? What should we do then? You don't know anything about gunpowder weapons. Van also stood on Brian's side. Transporting cannons and ammunition is hard work. They're not like swords that can be used all the time. We'll need several ships to replenish the supplies consumed in a battle. If we take the initiative to attack the enemy before they enter the kingdom of Grey Castle, what if we run out of ammunition? I really don't know anything about gunpowder weapons, nor do I know how you fight, but the most important thing in any war is the goal. If we don't achieve the goal, even if we win, it will be a failure. Edith did not give in. His Majesty needs every citizen of Grey Castle, but you allow the church to enter the kingdom and wantonly consume the population? If we can't win, everything will be meaningless. Solving those seemingly unsolvable problems is what we should do. Only Roland and Iron Axe could make the final decision. However, as long as the prince was present, Iron Axe would not say a word. No matter what order Roland gave, this Sand Nation would unconditionally carry it out. Both views had their advantages and disadvantages, so it was difficult for Roland to make a decision at the moment. The most effective way of fighting with gunpowder weapons was to establish a crossfire network and then wait for the enemy to run into it. Undoubtedly, the western region was the best place to set up a defense in advance. However, if the church really drove the people of Grey Castle to be the vanguard of the army, it would be a great loss for him. Even if bullets could easily defeat the madmen, it would be difficult to make up for the lost population in a short time. On the eve of the army's attack, Sir Schilt's proposal broke the stalemate. Why don't we gather the troops and supplies in the border cities in advance? Roland said while stroking his chin. That way, we can greatly shorten the transportation distance. Brian shook his head without hesitation. Unless we can know where the church will attack in advance. Mr. Sir, there aren't enough rivers in the northern region. If we gather the troops in the wrong place, we may not be able to catch up with the marching speed of the enemy, Carter added. The border between Grey Castle and the Kingdom of Dawn is so long that we can't take care of every passage. It's true that we don't know where the enemy will attack from, but we can persuade them to attack from a certain point. His words stunned everyone. After a while, Brian frowned and said, I'm afraid only the Pope can do this. Edith, however, showed a thoughtful look. Sir Schilt did not care about Brian's slightly sarcastic response and said frankly, in fact, I got the idea from Miss Edith. If we can predict the time of the church's invasion through the transportation of food, then they should also be able to detect the approaching war from the changes in the surrounding cities. Coldwind Ridge. Edith suddenly said. Exactly. Sir smiled. If we stock up a large number of supplies in Coldwind Ridge and station the First Army in Deep Valley Town, which is the nearest town, won't we have a greater chance of guiding the church's attack route? Why? Brian asked in confusion. Because Coldwind Ridge is too close to the Holy City, Edith explained. Instead of waiting for the church to attack, it's better to take the initiative to attack and force them to concentrate their forces here. I see. Roland also quickly figured out the problem. Deep Valley Town was the only town connected to the central water network. Although it was a long distance, the paddle ships could still transport a large number of supplies to the town in the next 1 or 2 months. After that, the transport time could be shortened to 3 days by land. It might not be completely enough, but at least it could barely meet the needs of a large-scale battle. Of course, a better way was to directly set up a defense line below Coldwind Ridge and wait for the enemy to attack the position formed by blockhouses, barbed wire, and trenches. What if they insist on not taking this route? Vander asked. Chapter 585. When Anna opened her eyes, she saw a sea of red everywhere, and the hot air hit her face, burning her skin. Flames. There were flames everywhere, and thick smoke rolled under the shed, making it hard for her to breathe. There were cries coming from the inside of the house, or maybe it was just an illusion. The wood crackled under the licking of the flames, and from time to time, there were sparks and burning pieces of wood falling from above. She climbed down the haystack and tried to take 2 steps into the house, but was quickly pushed back by the heat wave. In the end, she could only crawl out of the wooden house, and helplessly watched the house being engulfed by the raging fire. The neighbors also gathered around, and some people began to help put out the fire, but the nearest water source was the Redwater River outside the town, and the few jars of water that were difficult to fetch were of no help in the face of the fire. After running back and forth several times, Anna finally saw the figure of her father. He had just come back from the mine, still wearing a dirty coat, and his face was covered with gray and black dust. He was standing in front of the house with a blank look on his face. As if she had seen her backbone, she could no longer suppress the panic and fear in her heart. Tears rolled down her cheeks like pearls, and she cried and ran to her father, hugging him tightly. However, her father did not comfort her as she had hoped. "Where's your mother?" He seized her by the shoulder with such force that she cried out. "And your brother too." Anna shook her head, but did not expect that what followed was a slap in the face. "I can't believe you escaped alone. Why didn't you save them? Damn it, how could you only care about yourself?" Anna suddenly sat up from the bed, gasping for breath. Her father's scolding still seemed to echo in her ears for a long time. It was this dream again. She picked up the cup on the bedside and drank the cold water. It took her a while to recover. At the beginning of every month, Anna would dream of this scene, as if there was someone in her mind reminding her of it. She tilted her head and looked at the desk calendar on the desk. Today was the end of the first week of summer, and also the day when the witch union would pay. She put on her clothes, washed up, and then walked out of the castle to the witch building in the backyard. "Sister Anna." Belle beamed as soon as she saw her. "You're early." "Good morning," Vendi said with a gentle smile. "The weather looks good today. Are you still going to North Slope Mountain?" "Lady Anna." Her two former classmates also hurriedly bowed. "Just call me Anna like usual." She waved her hand, sat down at the long table, and hesitated. "I still have some other things to do, so I'll go there in the afternoon." "Oh? That's rare." Vendi showed an interested expression. Could it be that he and His Majesty? "Shopping!" Ling shouted. Pearl and Gray Rabbit could not help but laugh. Anna shook her head but did not continue. Vendi didn't ask further. Instead, he took out an envelope from the drawer and handed it to her. "This month's salary is 2 golden dragon stones." "Thank you." The witches did not have to prepare their own food, clothing, and accommodation. Even if they bought luxury goods from the convenience market, they would have to try them out first. Even if they wanted more, it would not be a problem. Therefore, most witches thought that the salary was useless and did not understand why His Majesty insisted on doing so. Anna could roughly guess Roland's intention, and this move helped her. She returned to the castle hall with the salary. Chief Knight Carter Lannis was already waiting there. "Miss Anna." He stood up and asked, "Is it the same as usual?" She took out a golden dragon stone from the envelope and handed it to the knight. "The same as usual." During the reconstruction of Border Town, all the natives were allocated a house, including Anna's father. After he sold Anna to the church for 25 golden dragon stones, Anna never contacted him again. From that moment on, he was no longer her father. But there were some things that she could not completely stay out of. For example, this golden dragon stone. Probably like most poor people who suddenly got a windfall, he did not keep the money for long. Gambling, swindling, and stealing made him destitute in just half a year. At that time, Anna had not yet become famous, but some natives had recognized her when she sealed the gap in the city wall with fire. He had tried to ask a neighbor to look for his daughter, but he was refused and ridiculed. Later, this matter reached the ears of Carter, who was responsible for forming the militia, and Carter disclosed it to Anna. From then on, she knew that she had to do something to make her father, who had betrayed her, quiet down. She did not want him to bring trouble to Roland. They came to a quiet residential area in the east of the city and went up to the second floor of a building. Carter turned around and said, "Miss Anna, wait for me here." "Thank you." "No, it's just a piece of cake." He walked to a door and knocked hard on it. After a moment, the door opened with a squeak. "Ah, it's Sir Knight. Why did you take so long to open the door? Are you deaf?" Carter scolded. "Get out of the way, don't block the door." Yes, maybe it was better this way." Anna leaned against the wall of the corridor and sighed in her heart. To be honest, she did not want to care about this former father at all, but she knew that ignoring him would only make the situation worse. And she could not do it herself. Otherwise, her stubbornness and arrogance that could not see the situation clearly would make him habitually show off his power as a father, which would not work as a deterrent. Instead of begging him, it was better to let him realize that the status between them was as different as heaven and earth. As the chief knight that the people of the border area were familiar with, Carter was already a great noble in the eyes of ordinary people. Using this golden dragon as a fee to keep his mouth shut, coupled with some stern warnings, should be enough to keep him quiet, and His Majesty would not have to bear another burden for this. Anna did not understand the relationship between them before. Ever since she was arrested and imprisoned, she had lost interest in everything, and the world had turned into a lifeless gray. It was not until Roland rescued her that she saw a different color from the past. After living in the castle for a while, Anna gradually understood the complicated relationship between people, and she also had a new understanding of why her father would vent his anger on her. But she did not like these twisted things at all. She could only really relax when she was with Roland. And those books that recorded wonderful knowledge, they seemed complicated and difficult to understand, but after in-depth contact, one would find that the relationship between them was so simple and direct, and would never change because of interests or desires. The formula that revealed the true face of the world was so clean and concise, so the world should be like this. The door opened again, and with a flattering voice asking him to stay, Carter returned to her side and said, "Miss Anna, it's done." After finishing this, Anna suddenly felt a lot more relaxed. "Don't tell His Majesty." "Of course. I understand." She nodded, then turned around and walked down the stairs. It was true that she could not get rid of these disgusting feelings, but with His Majesty, there would always be more and more beautiful things. She could not wait to go to North Slope Mountain and continue her research work. Chapter 586. Returning to Border Town after a gap of nearly 4 months, Lotus had a new feeling. The town seemed to be constantly growing. Even the heavy snowfall did not stop its expansion. This feeling was particularly obvious every time she stepped on the Redwater Bridge. Rows of factories were arranged neatly on the south bank of the river, while the dock area on the opposite side had expanded by several times. At any time, one could see many stone boats dragging black smoke back and forth on the river, covering the originally sparkling surface of the river. "It's much more lively here than on Sleeping Island." Honey leaned on the railing of the bridge and looked down. "There are as many people as ants." "I think so too." She remembered that when the bridge was first built, she didn't understand why His Majesty wanted to make the bridge so wide and felt that it was a waste of materials. Now it seemed that this decision was just right. There was an endless stream of people shuttling back and forth on both sides of the river. From time to time, some people would look at them, seemingly very curious about their dress and appearance. If they were in other cities, Lotus would probably have to think about how to escape. In addition to these obvious changes, there were also many improvements in life. For example, the heating system that made people feel warm just by listening to it, the electric lights that could bring bright light at night, and the new food that could replace ice cream bread and so on. She could listen to Evelyn and Candle talk about these all day, but they were not the most surprising things to Lotus. In fact, what made her feel that the biggest change was the relationship between witches and ordinary people. This could be seen from the tavern opened by Evelyn. The tavern was funded by the Witch Union, and Evelyn served as the manager and bartender, mixing novel and delicious drinks for the guests who visited the western region. It was said that this was also His Majesty's idea. Rather than letting the witch's salary stay in the drawer, it was better to take it out and do some business. Lotus had once been invited by Wendy to drink 2 glasses of iced cider there. The taste was really good. It had a mellow aroma that ale didn't have, and it was mixed with a strong fruity flavor. It was served in a transparent crystal glass, and showed a clean light green color. It looked quite tempting. Moreover, the environment was not as noisy and chaotic as an ordinary tavern. The customers were basically sitting at their own tables, drinking and chatting. The floor, tables, and wine utensils were clean. If it were not for the row of wine barrels behind the bar counter, she would not have associated this place with a tavern. Of course, this was also related to the high price of the drinks. Evelyn stood in front of the bar and chatted with the customers like any other manager. No one scolded her because she was a witch. On the contrary, many foreign businessmen came to drink out of curiosity. Rin had rarely seen her smile so happily. It was obvious that she really liked this job. Lotus remembered that before she left, most of the witches' activities were basically within the castle area. If they needed to go out, they would generally be followed by His Majesty's guards. But now, they had gradually integrated into every part of the town. It was inconceivable that the western region could undergo such great changes in just one winter. The conversation with Vendi at night had also given her a deeper understanding. Perhaps this was the reason why the witches of the Alliance were willing to sacrifice everything for this. Not only were they building Neverwinter for His Majesty, but they were also building their own homes. "Let's go," Lotus pouted at Honey. "If everything goes well, we can finish the transformation of the estuary today." When the last piece of rock sank into the ground, Lotus wiped the fine sweat on her forehead and let out a long sigh. "Awesome," Honey applauded. "You actually opened a path in the mountain." A row of birds squatting in the treetops above her head also chirped. "Of course," Lotus said with a proud smile. "There's nothing I can't do." Different from the reefs surrounding Sleeping Island, the rock layer here was much deeper and harder, so it took a lot of magic power to sink. Fortunately, she did not need to turn the whole mountain into a flat land. According to His Majesty's plan, she only needed to open up a path that could allow 5 or 6 carriages to pass side by side. With the experience of the Iron Bridge, this time she would not think that such a spacious path was superfluous. Since the hills were more than 40 meters higher than the sea, there was only one fastest way, which was to sink the ground little by little until it became a long, gentle slope. In order to make it convenient for carriages to pass, she also deliberately pressed the surface rocks into a straight road, so that even if it rained, there would be no puddles of varying depths. Now, as long as she stood on the top of the slope, she could see the golden shoals and the blue sea on the opposite side. The cool sea breeze rushed up along the slope, mixed with a familiar salty smell. "Did you bring a fire?" Honey skipped to her side. "No, what are you going to do?" "Of course I'm going down to roast fish." She smacked her lips. "I'm responsible for attracting the fish, and you push them out of the water. It's okay if you don't bring a fire. They'll be dry in the sun for 2 days." The birds above her head chirped even more happily. Lotus rolled her eyes. "I won't let this place be filled with the fishy smell of salted fish. By the way, didn't you get tired of eating that thing on Sleeping Island?" I think it's pretty good." Honey tilted her head and said, "Anyway, it's forbidden to dry fish here, and His Majesty won't like the fishy smell of salted fish." Lotus suddenly thought of Ashes and wondered if she was still troubled by all kinds of fish soup on Sleeping Island. "I heard from His Majesty that he plans to build a harbor here, so that Lady Tilly can come whenever she wants, and she won't have to fly over the mountain by hot air balloon." Hearing the name of Her Highness Tilly, Honey's attention was immediately attracted. "Then will she come?" The little girl's expression was even easier to understand than that of an animal. Lotus patted her fluffy hair and said, "I don't know, but His Majesty is about to go to war with the church. She should come to help her brother." In fact, she was not so sure, especially after knowing the background of the Bloodfang Association and Heidi Morgan. She used to dislike the arrogant attitude of these combat witches, but now it seemed that they were also a group of pitiful people. After taking off the shell of prejudice, they were actually no different from herself. At least now, she could occasionally talk to Iffy, but the other combat witches on the island would definitely not be so easily persuaded by Tilly. "Oh, that's great." "Great? This girl knows nothing about war," Lotus thought to herself. If Lady Tilly can't solve the problem of the Bloodfang Association, and the church attacks His Majesty with all its strength, it will be really troublesome. But she also hoped that Lady Tilly could come to Border Town again. And it would be better if she could stay here forever. In this way, the wish she made in winter could come true. In this way, whether it's me or the other witches, we can all live happily in Border Town. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.